She landed on the world at dawn. By noon, she had found the first sign that something was wrong. Not the sign you expect, not blood or ruin or the evidence of violence. The sign she found was the absence of all of that. A world with nothing dead on it. A world that had been emptied so completely that the emptying had left no mark. She was trained, she was careful, she documented everything. She wrote for 11 days. What she found on that world, what found her, what grew in the space between those two things, it is in the log. All of it. The grey valley and the silence and the creature she caught sight of on the fourth morning, standing in the ashen rain, facing her position, utterly still. Not hunting, waiting. This is her account. She wanted you to hear it. By the end, you will understand why that sentence is the most frightening thing in it. Chapter 1. The Color of Silence. There is one sound that a world makes when it is still alive. You don't notice this kind of sound until it's gone. The movement of insects through dry grass. The particular give of soil under your boot that tells you something is living inside it. Aerating, feeding, existing in the dark below the surface. Wind that has passed through leaves before it reaches your face, carrying the memory of them. Rain that tastes of something. Minerals, pollen. The exhalation of 10,000 organisms you will never see and never need to name. I am trained in battlefield assessment. 12 years of it. I know how to read ground, how to identify threat vectors, how to classify a world's habitability inside 40 minutes of surface exposure. I can look at soil color and make a reasonable estimate of its mineral content. I can listen to wind patterns and extract tactical information from them the way another person might read a map. I tell you this so you understand what I mean when I say, the first thing I noticed about this world was that nothing was dead, not dying, not decayed, not even the picked clean remnant of something that had once lived. Gone, as if the world had been rinsed. My name is Elia Voss, Sergeant-Archivist, 3rd Obscura Expeditionary, detached secondment to rogue trader household Brennevar. I am recording this log because recording logs is what I do when I do not know what else to do, and because I was trained a very long time ago by a man I respected, that the act of writing is the act of imposing order on chaos, that the moment you name a thing, you begin to understand it, and the moment you understand it, you begin to survive it. I am going to keep writing until I understand this, or until something stops me. The Brennevar Ascendant came out of the Mandeville Point at 0312 shipboard time running on reserve plasma. The navigator was dead, had been dead for 6 hours before anyone admitted it, which is the kind of information that, in retrospect, explains a great deal. I do not know exactly what system this is. I do not know its designation. I know it has one star, pale and distant, and one planet in the habitable band, and that the planet below us was listed in Brennevar's charts as a survey site, flagged for potential resource extraction 2 years prior by a prospector vessel, whose last known location was the Corvus Drift. The prospector vessel was never recovered. There are things you learn to notice in 12 years of expeditionary service, and one of them is when the people responsible for decisions have quietly stopped making them. When the silence on the command deck goes from purposeful to something else. When the officers stop meeting each other's eyes. I noticed. I went to the landing bay. I requisitioned a survey shuttle with forged credentials and a calm expression. I was the 3rd person to make it off the ship. I do not know what happened to the other 2. The shuttle hit the atmosphere at 0517. I know this because I wrote it down. The descent was controlled mostly. The landscape below was, and I need you to understand I am choosing this word carefully. I am not reaching for poetry. I am making a technical observation. Grey. Not the grey of rock, not the grey of cloud cover, though there was cloud cover, thin and high and absolutely featureless. The grey of the surface was different. It was the grey of something that had been another colour and had had that colour removed. The grey of a drawing that someone has erased. I sat down in what the survey charts marked as a river valley. I know it was a river valley because the geography was correct. The slope of the terrain, the carved quality of the lowland, the way the land leaned toward a central channel. But the river was not there, and the riverbed was not silt, not sediment, not the accumulated residue of water and time. It was smooth, scoured, as if something had passed over it and taken the content of it away without disturbing the shape. I stepped out of the shuttle at 5:49, and I stood very still for a long time. The silence was... I have been sitting here for 4 minutes trying to find the accurate word for this silence, and I cannot. It was not peaceful. It was not the silence of a wilderness, which has a texture to it. The absence of human sound still full of everything else. This silence was whole. It was the silence of a place that had been silenced. Actively. Completely. The way you might silence a room by removing every object from it, until even the echoes had nothing to bounce from. I breathed in. The air tasted of nothing. Not thin, not cold, nothing. As if it had been scrubbed of everything it had ever carried. My first thought was atmospheric processing. Some kind of industrial extraction, badly managed. The kind of environmental catastrophe that frontier systems accumulate the way old ships accumulate rust. My second thought was a geological event, a volcanic winter, an impact event, some natural catastrophe that had scoured the surface and given the world time to settle into this strange, still aftermath. These were the thoughts of someone who had not yet looked at the soil. The soil, if you can call it that, and I'm not certain you can, was not soil in any meaningful sense. Soil is a living system. Soil is fungal networks and bacterial colonies and the compressed remains of 10,000 generations of organisms feeding each other in the dark. Soil has texture because it has content. It resists the pressure of a boot because there are things inside it that push back. This did not push back. It compressed under my boot like ash, like the fine grey powder at the bottom of a furnace after everything combustible has been consumed. It had the same quality, light, structureless, emptied out. I crouched and took a sample and held it in my palm, and it was the color of old bone, and it had no smell, and when I pressed it between my fingers, it separated into dust without resistance, the way something separates when every structural element has been removed, and only the ghost of its shape remains. I took 6 soil samples in the first hour. I tagged them and logged them and told myself this was useful. Mostly I needed something to do with my hands. At 0743, I established a base camp in the lee of what the survey charts called a ridge formation, though it was more accurate to call it a scar, a long raised wound in the landscape that ran northeast for as far as I could see in either direction. It provided shelter from the wind, which was steady and directionless in a way that wind is not supposed to be, and it gave me a clear sight line across the valley floor, which my training told me was tactically preferable, and which my instincts told me something else entirely. My instincts had been telling me something else entirely since I stepped off the shuttle. I want to be precise about this, because I think precision matters here, and I think I am still capable of it, and I want to record this moment of capability before anything changes. What my instincts were telling me was not fear. It was not the sharp animal response to visible threat. It was something quieter and more corrosive than that. It was the response you have when you enter a room, and you know without being able to say how, that something has been moved, that the room is wrong in some way you cannot locate, that something has been present here that is no longer present, but whose absence has a shape. The world was wrong in that way, entirely and in every direction, and without exception. I set up the Vox relay. I set up the Auspex. I opened my log and wrote the date and my name and my location as best I could estimate it. And then I sat for a while with the stylus in my hand. I wrote, "Surface is viable. Atmosphere is breathable. No immediate threat identified." I looked at this for a long time. Then I added, "The silence here is the loudest thing I've ever heard." At 1100, I conducted a survey of a 2-kilometer radius from camp. This is standard procedure. This is something I have done on 17 different worlds in 12 years of service, and it is as automatic to me as breathing, and I performed it with the same careful, methodical attention I always do. And it was only when I was returning to camp at the end of it that I realized what was notable about what I had seen. Nothing was dead. I need you to understand what this means, technically, because I want you to feel what I felt when I understood it, and you can only feel it if you understand it properly. A world that has undergone extinction, any kind of extinction, whether geological, climatic, or otherwise, leaves evidence of what it lost. You find the remains of things, the shells of things, the compressed imprints of things that were once present and are no longer. Even a world that has been dead for 10,000 years has a record of its death. Life leaves a residue. Life leaves marks in stone and chemistry and the particular quality of soil that has once been fed by other living things. This world had no residue, not ancient residue, long since degraded. No residue at all. Whatever this world had once contained, whatever had grown here, moved here, lived here in the soil and the water and the air, had not died. It had been taken. I found the boot at 1347. I almost missed it. It was half buried in the grey dust at the base of the ridge, and it was the same dull color as everything else. And the reason I noticed it was not visual. I noticed it because it was the first thing in 6 hours of surveying that was something. The first object with mass and purpose and the particularity of a made thing. I walked toward it the way you walk toward a fire in cold country. Not because you've decided to, but because your body has decided before you have. It was a standard issue survey boot, Brenevar household pattern, which meant it came from the Ascendant or from one of its prior expeditions. It was in good condition, not worn through, not badly scuffed. The kind of boot that has seen a moderate amount of use and is in the early middle of its working life. I stood over it for a long time before I picked it up. It was not empty. The foot was still inside, intact, preserved, the skin grey and papery, but structurally whole, clean, no blood, no staining on the leather of the boot, no marking in the dust around it, no signs of trauma, no evidence of the violence that the presence of the foot implied, because the foot had not been removed by violence. It had been removed with a precision that no blade I have ever seen could replicate. The separation was at the ankle, clean as a seam, and the exposed surface of the wound had the same grey, dried quality as everything else on this world, as if the process that had taken it had also, in the same moment, taken everything from it that might bleed or decay or leave a mark. I set it back down very carefully. I noted the time in my log. I stood up and looked at the valley floor and the ridge and the high, featureless cloud, and I breathed the air that tasted of nothing. And I thought, something did this. Something was here. Something removed everything that this world contained, and it removed it so completely that the world itself looks like a container that has been cleaned out. And then I thought the thing I have not been able to stop thinking since. If it took everything, if it left nothing, then why is this boot still here? Why did it leave this? I looked at the grey and silent valley for a long time. The valley did not answer. I went back to camp and I locked the shuttle door, and I sat in the silence that was not peaceful, and I wrote this down. End of log entry. Day 1, surface time. Location, undesignated. Status, alive. I am going to sleep now. I am going to try not to think about the fact that the separation at the ankle, the clean, precise, utterly bloodless separation, looks less like a wound and more like a sample. The Auspex showed 17 life signs, then 11, then 1, then 17 again. I assumed it was damaged. I was not thinking clearly about what it would mean if it wasn't. Chapter 2. What the Auspex refused to see. Day 2 begins the way Day 1 ended. Silence. Grey light through the shuttle viewport. The particular quality of stillness that this world has. Not resting, not dormant, but emptied. The way a held breath is not the same as an exhaled one. I slept for about 4 hours. I know because I set an alarm, and the alarm woke me, and I lay in the dark for a while, not moving, performing the inventory that soldiers learn to perform before they open their eyes. What do I hear? What do I smell? What is the quality of the surface beneath me? Whether the world outside has changed in the night in ways that require immediate response. What I heard was nothing. What I smelled was nothing. The surface beneath me was unchanged. I opened my eyes and the grey light was exactly where I had left it, steady and sourceless, and I lay there a moment longer than necessary. Here is what I remember thinking. I am fine. The situation is manageable. I have supplies for 16 days, a functioning weapon, a shuttle that will fly when I need it to, and a training set that has prepared me for exactly this kind of isolation scenario. What I experienced yesterday was disorienting. The environment is strange. That is allowed. That does not constitute a crisis. I remember thinking all of this very carefully and very deliberately, in that particular order. I have thought about that deliberateness often since. The Auspex showed 17 life signs when I activated it at 0614. I looked at this for a moment. The Auspex is a standard expeditionary unit, riser pattern, ruggedized for frontier deployment. I have used Auspex equipment for 11 of my 12 years of service. I am familiar with their failure modes, the false positives generated by certain mineral compositions, the interference patterns produced by electromagnetic anomalies, the way certain atmospheric conditions can scatter a return signal into apparent readings that resolve into nothing when you move the unit or cycle the power. I know what a malfunctioning Auspex looks like. I cycled the power. 17 life signs. I changed the sensitivity threshold. I ran a calibration cycle. I checked the power cell and found it at 91%, which is not the power level of a malfunctioning unit. I looked at the display for a long time, at the 17 points scattered across the sweep radius, some of them close, within 200 meters, and some of them at the edge of the detection range, which at this setting meant approximately 800 meters. 800 meters of grey, empty, utterly lifeless terrain, and 17 things living inside it. I looked out of the viewport. The valley was as I had left it. Still, empty. The ridge running northeast, the grey sky above it, the dust that was not soil sitting undisturbed in every direction as far as I could see. I went back to the Auspex. 11 life signs. I had not touched it. I had not changed a setting, or moved the unit, or done anything that should have altered a reading. 6 of the 17 had simply stopped registering. In the time it had taken me to look out the viewport and look back, I wrote this down. I noted the time. I noted the readings, the original 17 and the current 11, and I wrote next to them, equipment fault, likely, confirm with secondary sweep on foot. I noted the time again. I looked back at the display. One life sign, a single point, stationary, at the center of the sweep radius. At the center of the sweep radius is where the Auspex unit itself is located. The single life sign was me. I sat with this for a moment, and then I wrote, false positive cascade, power cycling, unit requires inspection. I told myself this was the correct interpretation. I told myself it calmly and with reasonable confidence, because I am trained to maintain reasonable confidence in high-stress environments, and because the alternative interpretation, that there had been something out there, 11 of them, and then they had gone, and the going had been deliberate, was not a useful operational posture. I power cycled the unit again. 17 life signs. I want to be honest with you about something. I am a careful person. I have been described by people who meant it as criticism and by people who meant it as praise, as methodical to a fault. I document things. I double-check things. I am the kind of person who runs calibration cycles on functioning equipment because the documentation requires it. I do not leap to conclusions. I do not allow anxiety to color my assessments. These are not qualities I was born with. They are habits I constructed over years against a natural temperament that tends toward the catastrophic interpretation of ambiguous information. I tell you this so you understand that when I say I chose not to think too hard about the Auspex readings, I am telling you something significant. I chose, consciously, to maintain the simpler interpretation. Faulty equipment, mineral interference, atmospheric scatter. I chose this the way you choose to not look at a thing that is in your peripheral vision, because you have calculated very quickly and below the level of conscious thought that looking directly at it will cost you something you cannot afford to spend. I made myself breakfast. I ran a manual check of the shuttle's flight systems. I updated my log with the previous night's soil sample analysis, which told me nothing I did not already know. The samples were empty of biological content, empty of mineral interest, empty of everything except the particular grey dust that appeared to be all this world had left. I drank recaf that tasted of nothing, because everything here tasted of nothing, and I sat in the shuttle and I did not think about the Auspex. At 800 I picked up the Auspex and went outside. The cold hit me differently on the second day, not deeper. The temperature was the same as the previous morning, a moderate chill that my equipment handled without difficulty, different in quality. The cold of the first day had felt like weather. The cold of the second day felt like the cold of a room that has been sealed for a long time, stale, unlived in, a cold that had settled into itself and had no intention of changing. I walked north along the ridge line, Auspex in my left hand, las pistol loose in the holster on my right. I did not draw the weapon. There was nothing to draw it at. The sweep showed only my own return, steady and singular at the center of the display, and the landscape around me was as empty to the eye as it was to the instrument. I walked for 90 minutes. In 90 minutes, I covered perhaps 5 kilometers of ridgeline. The ridge maintained its character throughout, that long raised scar, the grey rock of it exposed in places where the dust had not settled, and the rock was pale and pitted, and had the look of something that had been worked on, though not by any tool I could name. It looked consumed. That is the accurate word, and I understand it is not a comfortable one. The rock looked consumed, as if something had drawn out of it everything the rock had contained, and left the structure intact, but emptied. The way old wood looks when the termites have finished with it, hollow in its bones. At the 0940 mark, I stopped walking. I stopped because the Auspex had changed. Not to 17, not through the cycling pattern of the morning. It had changed to a single additional reading. One return, in addition to my own, that had not been present moments before. It was 300 meters north of my position. It was stationary. I looked north. 300 meters of grey ridge and grey dust and grey sky, and nothing in it that my eyes could find. I looked at the Auspex. The return was still there, stationary. The signal strength was... I checked this carefully, because signal strength tells you things about the size and density of a biological return. Strong. Very strong. Stronger than a human return at that range would typically present. I stood very still. I want to describe what I felt in this moment accurately, because I think it matters. What I felt was not fear exactly. Fear has a specific quality. It is forward-facing. It is about what might happen next. It has the quality of anticipation built around a threat vector. What I felt was something different. It was the feeling of being in a room and realizing that you have been in the room for some time, and you have not yet identified all of its contents. A retroactive feeling. A feeling that concerns not the future, but the past. The sense that the situation has been different from what you believed it to be for longer than you knew. I looked at the grey landscape for a long time. Nothing moved. I looked at the Auspex. The return was gone. I cycled the unit immediately, ran a full sweep, adjusted sensitivity to maximum, which shortened the detection radius, but improved resolution on close returns. My own signal. Nothing else. I stood in the grey cold for a long time. Then I wrote, anomalous return, single, 300 meters north. Duration approximately 90 seconds. No visual confirmation. Equipment fault suspected. Return to camp. I looked at what I had written. I looked at the landscape. Then I added in smaller writing, at the bottom of the entry, in the manner of someone writing something they are not entirely sure they intend to keep. It was very still. Whatever the Auspex was returning. The stillness was... It was not the stillness of a thing that isn't there. It had the quality of a thing that is choosing not to move. I looked at this for a moment. Then I crossed it out. Then after a pause, I wrote it again. I spent the afternoon at camp, conducting equipment checks that I had already conducted and did not need to conduct again. I am aware of what this behavior indicates. I am aware that when a trained professional begins performing redundant procedural tasks, it is because the tasks are not the point. The point is the performance of purposeful activity in an environment that has stopped yielding to purpose. The Auspex cycled through its patterns 3 more times during the afternoon. 17, 11, 1, 17. I logged each cycle. I noted the duration. The pattern was not consistent. Sometimes the 17 held for 10 minutes, sometimes for 40 seconds. The transition to 11 was always abrupt, always complete, never partial. The collapse to 1 was slower, a bleed, individual returns dropping out over the course of 30 to 60 seconds until only mine remained, and then, always, back to 17. I began, in the margins of my log, to draw diagrams, the positions of the 17, as best I could reconstruct them from the sweep display. I did this 3 times, across 3 separate cycles, and then I put the diagrams side by side. The positions were identical, not approximately identical, not the rough similarity you might expect from random interference generating consistent false positives. Identical. The same 17 points in the same spatial arrangement, returning in the same configuration each time the reading cycled back from 1 to 17. I looked at the diagrams for a long time. Then I turned the page and started a new entry and did not look at them again. At 1820 I was eating, ration block, flavorless as everything on this world, when the Vox crackled. I had not expected the Vox to produce anything. The relay I had established was functioning, but there was nothing to receive. No Imperial presence in this system that I knew of. No emergency beacon from the Ascendant. No signal traffic of any kind. The Vox had been running as background, as habit, as the tether to the wider galaxy that my training said to maintain even in environments where it served no practical purpose. The crackle resolved, briefly, into something that was almost a voice. Not a transmission, not the structured carrier signal of an Imperial Voxcast. Something thinner than that, and more fragmentary. The ghost of a signal, the residue of one. The way a shout leaves a temporary shape in air before the air closes over it. I could not make out words. I am not certain there were words, but there was. And I write this with the awareness that it sounds like the observation of someone who is not sleeping enough and is spending too much time alone. There was a quality to it that was not static. That had the rhythm of something that had once been intentional. I turned up the heat. The Vox hissed. The almost voice was gone. I sat for a while. I wrote, Vox anomaly 1820. Duration 4 to 6 seconds. Signal origin unknown. Possibly Ascendant debris field. Hull breakup can produce Vox ghost signals as power cells fail. I sat with this explanation. It is a real phenomenon. It has a technical basis. It is a completely reasonable interpretation of what I heard. I wrote it down and closed the log, and I was almost asleep when I thought. Not deliberately, the way thoughts come in the space between waking and sleep without permission, that the Ascendant had been in a high orbit when I left it, that a Vox ghost signal from a disintegrating ship in high orbit, bleeding down through an atmosphere, would not sound the way this had sounded. It would sound like breaking, like collapse, like the chaotic fragmentation of a system losing coherence. This had not sounded like that. This had sounded, and I am writing this at 2200 and I am not certain I will keep this entry, and I am writing it anyway. This had sounded like a thing that knew it was being listened to. I ran the Auspex one more time before I slept. One life sign. My own. And then, in the moment before I powered the unit down, in the brief window where the sweep completes its final rotation, 17. I powered it down. I sat in the dark shuttle, and I breathed the air that tasted of nothing, and I thought about the diagrams I had drawn and had not looked at again, the 17 points in their identical arrangement, and I thought about what it means when a pattern is consistent. A malfunction produces noise. A malfunction is by definition a deviation from intended function. It produces irregular output, varied output, output that reflects the random character of mechanical failure. Consistent output is not a malfunction. Consistent output means the instrument is reading something real. 17 things, in the same positions, every time. Outside, in the grey and silent valley. In the dark now, whatever dark meant on a world with a sky this overcast. And I was in a locked shuttle with a las pistol on the seat beside me, and an Auspex that had spent the day telling me, calmly and repeatedly, that I was not alone. And there was one more thing. One thing I had been not thinking about since I drew the diagrams and turned the page. One of the 17 positions, in all 3 diagrams, in the same location in all 3, perfectly consistent, was not outside. It was in the shuttle. It was where I was sitting. Which meant either the Auspex was reading my own return twice, a known fault mode, a documented fault mode, a completely rational explanation, or it meant that in the moment the 17 appear, one of them is so close to me that the instrument cannot separate us, that one of them is always here. I have been here. Has been here perhaps since I landed. I turned the light off. I did not sleep for a very long time. End of log entry. Day 2. Surface time. Status. Alive. Equipment. Auspex showing intermittent multiple returns. Source unconfirmed. Assessment. Interference pattern. Faulty unit. mineral composition, atmospheric scatter. I am going to keep saying that until it's true. I found the first tendril growth at 600. By 900 I understood what I was looking at. By noon I had stopped writing in my log. Some knowledge is not a weapon. Some knowledge is a wound. Chapter 3. The Architecture of Hunger. I found the first tendril growth at 600. By 900 I understood what I was looking at. By noon I had stopped writing in my log. I am writing now because I have decided, and this decision has cost me something. I can feel the cost of it the way you feel the cost of a wound before the pain arrives. That the only thing more dangerous than knowing this is not writing it down. That if something happens to me and the log is found and someone reads it, they need to know what is here, what this world is, what it has become or what it has always been, underneath the grey and the silence and the nothing that I mistook for death. So, 3 days in, here is what I know. The tendril growth was at the northern end of the ridge, in a cleft in the rock that I had passed twice the previous day without looking into. It caught my eye this morning because the colour was wrong. Not grey, not the universal grey of this world, but a deep red-brown, almost maroon, the colour of old blood or of something that has been feeding. I stopped walking and looked at it, and then I crouched and looked at it more carefully, and then I did not move for a while. It was biological, unmistakably, undeniably biological. The branching structure of it, the surface texture, the way it had pressed itself into the shape of the rock cleft as though it had grown into that space over time, finding the contours of it, filling them. It was approximately the diameter of my wrist at its thickest point, tapering as it branched, the branches themselves dividing into threads that disappeared into hairline fractures in the rock. Into the rock, not onto it, into it. As if the rock had channels prepared for it, or as if the growth itself had made the channels, slowly, patiently, over a period of time I could not estimate. I took a sample. Proper procedure. Sealed container, logged with coordinates and time and a physical description. I did not touch it with my bare hands. I have 11 years of xenobiological safety protocols built into my behavior, and they operated automatically, below conscious decision, the way good training does. What my conscious mind was doing, while my hands performed the correct actions, was much less controlled. My conscious mind was running through a catalogue. Everything I knew, formally and informally, that could produce biological growth of this character on a dead world. Extremophile organisms, certain fungal species that could survive in near vacuum. Contamination from the shuttle itself, though this was structurally impossible, given the growth's integration with the rock. I ran through the catalogue, and I found nothing that fit, and I kept running through it anyway, because the alternative was to look directly at the thing I already knew, and I was not ready to do that. I stood up. I looked north along the ridge. There was another growth, 30 meters away, in a similar cleft. The same red-brown, the same branching structure. I looked further, another, and another, and at the limits of my vision, in the grey morning light, what I had mistaken the previous day for shadows in the rock face, the natural patterning of stressed stone, resolved, as I stood there, into something else entirely. The ridge was threaded with it. I spent the next 3 hours walking the ridge and documenting what I found, and I am going to record it here in the same order I found it, because the order matters. Because the way understanding assembled itself, piece by piece, is part of what makes it what it is. You do not arrive at the full horror of this in a single moment. You arrive at it the way you arrive at the edge of a very long drop, gradually, and then all at once. And then you are standing there, and you cannot remember deciding to walk so far. The growth was not isolated to the clefts. Once I knew what to look for, Once my eye had calibrated to the specific character of it, the particular red-brown against grey, the branching signature, I began to see it everywhere. In the rock, yes, threading through fissures and seams with the patience of something that had been growing for a very long time, but also in the dust, beneath the dust. I disturbed the surface with my boot and found network filaments in the substrate, pale and fine, running in parallel threads that oriented consistently, not random, not the radial spread of a colonizing organism, but directed, purposeful, all of them running in the same direction, southeast. I followed the orientation for half a kilometer. The filaments thickened as I went. What had been hairline threads in the dust became structures I could see clearly without disturbing the surface, pressing up through it, the way roots press up through concrete over time. The substrate itself was changing, no longer the dry grey ash of the valley, but something slightly darker, slightly more yielding, with a faint warmth to it that I felt through my boot sole, and stopped and crouched and pressed my gloved hand against and confirmed. Warm. Not warm the way sun-heated rock is warm. Warm the way something is warm when something is happening inside it. I followed the warmth. What I found at the end of the trail is the thing I stopped writing to think about. The thing I sat with for 2 hours in the flat grey afternoon before I decided I needed to document it. I am going to use the correct terminology because I think it is important to be precise, and because precision is the only control I have over what I am describing. What I found was a nodal structure, a convergence point, a place where the filament network that threaded the ridge and the substrate and the rock gathered itself together into a mass approximately 2 meters in diameter and perhaps 1 meter proud of the surface, seated in a natural depression in the valley floor, as though the depression had been made for it, or as though the structure had, over time, made the depression itself. It was warm to the instrument. I scanned it at range. I did not approach closer than 10 meters. My training, and something older than my training, both insisting on that distance. It was warm throughout, a consistent internal temperature significantly above the ambient. It was pulsing, not rapidly, not with the quick rhythm of a small animal's heartbeat, but slowly, at long intervals, the way something pulses when it is very large and very old and has all the time it needs. I stood at 10 meters and I looked at it, and I understood, standing there, what I was looking at. Not the specific biology of it. I am an archivist, not a xenobiologist. My knowledge of Tyranid bioconstructs is limited to what appears in tactical assessments and the occasional fragment of Ordo Xenos documentation I have handled in the course of my archival work. But enough. Enough to know the signature. Enough to understand what a biological network threading an entire landscape means. What the warmth means. What the directionality of the filaments means, and the nodal convergence, and the pulsing. This is not what happened to this world. This is what is still happening to it. The consumption is not complete. The landscape has been processed. The biomass that was once here extracted and distributed through this network, fed into it, broken down and transmitted. But the network itself is still active, still feeding. On the rock now, on the mineral substrate, working more slowly than it would work on organic material, but working, always working, with the patience of a thing that does not experience time the way we experience time. This world is not dead. This world is being digested. I went back to camp. I did not run. I want to be clear about that. I walked at a measured pace, the pace of a person who has assessed their situation and determined that running would serve no tactical purpose and would cost energy that might be needed later. I walked, and I kept my breathing even, and I did not look back at the nodal structure, though I was aware of it behind me the whole way, aware of its warmth, aware of its pulse, The way you are aware of a light source, even when your back is turned to it. I sat in the shuttle. I thought about the ridge. I thought about the fact that I had set up camp in the lee of the ridge because it offered shelter and a clear sight line, and that the ridge was threaded entirely through with active biological network material, and that I had been sleeping against it for 2 nights. I thought about the Auspex, the 17 returns, the consistent positions, the way the pattern oriented, if I thought about it now with what I now knew, less like scattered life signs and more like a map of nodes, network intersections, points where the subsurface filaments converged in the substrate beneath me. I thought about the return that the Auspex placed inside the shuttle. I thought about what a biological network of this scale required to sustain itself, what it was connected to, what kind of intelligence oversaw a consumption process that could strip an entire world's biomass without leaving residue, that could direct the digestion of rock and mineral through filaments finer than thread, that could maintain the architecture of an active network across a landscape of this size. There is only one answer to that question. There has only ever been one answer. I am on a feeding ground. And somewhere on this world, somewhere close enough that the network here is still warm, still active, still pulsing at its slow and patient intervals, the thing that directs this network is present, not the Hive fleet, not the distant, incomprehensible mass of ships and will, something more immediate, something that functions as the focused attention of the Hive mind in a specific place, a commander, a nexus, a thing that carries within it the full cognitive weight of a consciousness that does not think the way we think, that does not want the way we want, that processes and directs and optimizes with a coldness that makes the concept of malice seem almost comforting by comparison. Because malice is personal. Malice sees you. What I am describing does not see you. What I am describing does not know you are here in any sense that your presence registers as significant. And I am crouched in the lee of its nervous system. I have been sleeping against it. The warmth I felt through my boot sole this morning. I felt it now, thinking about it, as though the memory of it had a temperature, as though something in my body had registered it before my mind had caught up. I opened the log. I wrote the time. I wrote the date. I wrote the coordinates of the nodal structure. Then I sat for a long time with the stylus in my hand, and I thought about what to write next. And what I kept coming back to was not the structure, not the network, not the implications of what this world was and what was present on it. What I kept coming back to was the camp, specifically the location of the camp. The decision I had made on the first day to shelter against the ridge. How natural that decision had felt. How obvious. The tactical logic of it clean and simple and unquestioned. How the ridge had offered itself, and I had accepted. And I had not thought to ask why a ridge would offer itself on a world that had no reason to arrange things for my comfort. The nodal structure I found this morning is beneath my camp. Not near it, not adjacent to it, beneath it. Directly beneath the spot where I laid my sleeping roll 2 nights ago and closed my eyes and told myself the situation was manageable. I have been warm these 2 nights, warmer than the ambient temperature should have allowed. I did not question this. End of log entry. Day 3. Status: alive. The growth is biological. The network is active. The consumption is ongoing. I have relocated camp to the shuttle interior and sealed the outer lock. I have not yet decided what to do about the fact that the warmth, the specific warmth of the nodal structure, I can still feel it. Through the shuttle floor, directly beneath me, it is very faint. It would be easy to dismiss. I have not dismissed it. Chapter 4. It does not hunt. It could have killed me on the 3rd day. I know that now. The question that has not left me since, the question I cannot answer without losing something I cannot name, is why it didn't. Chapter 4. It does not hunt. It could have killed me on the third day. I know that now. I've had time to reconstruct the timeline, to map what I know against what I experienced, and the conclusion is not ambiguous. On the third day, at approximately 1400 hours, I was in the open, exposed, focused entirely on the nodal structure I had found at the valley floor, crouched at 10 meters distance with my instrument in my hand, and my attention narrowed to a point, the way attention narrows when you have found the thing you were looking for, and the finding of it has temporarily overridden every other faculty. I was completely vulnerable for approximately 40 minutes. Nothing happened. At the time, I logged this as absence, as the absence of threat, which is not the same as safety, and which I knew even then was not the same as safety, but which functions similarly enough that the mind accepts the substitution. Nothing happened, therefore I was not in danger. This is the logic of prey that has not yet understood its situation, and I am writing it down because I think honesty, at this stage, is the only currency I have left. The question that has not left me since, the question I cannot answer without losing something I cannot name, is why it didn't. I saw it for the first time on the morning of the fourth day. I want to write that carefully because I think accuracy matters. I saw it for the first time on the morning of the fourth day. I do not know when it first saw me. I do not know if saw is even the correct verb for what a Hive Tyrant does with the sensory apparatus it possesses, which is not limited to the optical, which extends through the synaptic web it anchors to the hive mind, like a root extends through soil, sensing, processing, transmitting, receiving. I do not know if I was the object of its attention from the moment I landed, or from some point after, or whether my presence on this world registered as anything more significant than a minor anomaly in the consumption data it was managing. I do not know these things. I know I saw it on the morning of the fourth day, and I know that seeing it, really seeing it, at distance, in the flat grey light, standing in the open in the ashen rain that had started overnight, rearranged something in me that has not rearranged back. I had gone out at 700 to take atmospheric readings, routine, the kind of task that serves the dual purpose of generating data and providing structure to a day that would otherwise have no structure, which is its own kind of survival strategy. I had the instruments in hand. I was perhaps 150 meters from the shuttle, moving northeast along the valley floor, when I looked up. I am going to describe what I saw as accurately as I can. It was standing at the northern end of the valley, at the base of the ridge, perhaps 400 meters from my position. It was large. This is the first word, the unavoidable word, before any other assessment was possible. Large in the way that certain things are large, and you do not have a useful frame of reference for the largeness, because nothing in your experience has prepared you for it at close range. I have seen battle imagery. I have processed tactical documentation. I understood, intellectually, the physical scale of a Hive Tyrant in the way that you can understand the scale of something from numbers and diagrams. Understanding from numbers is nothing. It is a drawing of a fire. It is not warm. It stood, and the word stood requires examination, because it was not the standing of a thing at rest. It was the standing of a thing that had chosen this particular posture and this particular location with complete deliberateness. It stood in the ashen rain with a quality of stillness that I have been trying to find words for since I saw it, and have not found words adequate to the task. Not frozen, not hiding. The stillness of a thing that has no need to move, because moving is not what it is doing right now. Because what it is doing right now requires only that it remains exactly where it is. It was facing me, not approximately facing me, not oriented in my general direction. Facing me. Whatever sensory organs processed my presence, oriented toward the specific point in the valley floor where I was standing with my instruments in my hand and my mouth, I realized, open. I did not move. I am not certain I was capable of moving. The rain continued. The grey light held. The distance between us, 400 meters of scoured valley floor, of grey dust and exposed rock and the invisible filament network threading the substrate beneath both of us, did not change because neither of us changed it. I stood and it stood and the rain fell between us and I need to find the exact word for this. I was not afraid. This surprises me even now writing it. I have been afraid of this world. I have felt the specific fear of isolation, the crawling anxiety of the Auspex readings, the vertiginous wrongness of the nodal structure beneath my camp. But standing there, with the Hive Tyrant at 400 meters in the grey rain, what I felt was not fear. What I felt was small, not threatened, not targeted. Small, in the specific way that a thing feels small when it has been placed next to something that does not perceive it as significant. There is a particular quality to being beneath notice, to be present in the sensory field of something vast, and finding that your presence does not change what the vast thing does, that you are data, perhaps, that you are reading on an instrument, that you are not, in any meaningful sense, the point. I have felt fear from predators before. I have felt the specific horror of being hunted, the sense that something with intent and focus has made you the object of that intent and focus, that your continued existence is now a variable in another creature's calculations. Being hunted has a quality of intimacy to it, horrifying but comprehensible. The hunter and the hunted are in a relationship. They are, in the most terrible sense, together in the same story. This was not that. This was something standing 400 meters away in the rain, doing what it had been doing before I appeared and what it would continue doing after I ceased to be relevant, and processing my presence the way a vast system processes a minor input, absorbing it, categorizing it, filing it, continuing. I was an interruption in a calculation that was not about me. That is the most frightening thing I have ever experienced. I want to be honest about that. More frightening than the boot. More frightening than the Auspex readings. More frightening than the warmth beneath the shuttle floor. The most frightening thing I have encountered in 12 years of frontier service is standing in a valley in the rain and understanding, with complete and terrible clarity, that the thing 400 meters away does not particularly care whether I live or die, that it has not yet decided which is more useful. I went back to the shuttle. I walked, not ran, because running is a response to being pursued, and I was not being pursued. I walked at a measured pace, and I did not look back, not because I was performing calm, but because something in me understood that looking back would be a concession to a framework that did not apply here. The framework of predator and prey, of hunter and target, of a chase with stakes for both parties. That framework was not operative. Looking back would be an acknowledgement that it was, and the acknowledgement would be false, and I have tried, throughout this log, to avoid false acknowledgements even when they would be more comfortable than accurate ones. I sealed the shuttle, and I sat down, and I opened the log, and I wrote, direct visual contact, northern end of valley, distance approximately 400 meters. I stared at this. Then I wrote, it did not approach. I stared at this too. Then I wrote the thing I had been not writing since I turned away from the valley. It was waiting, not resting, not feeding, not engaged in any activity that I could identify. It was standing in the open, in the rain, facing my position, and it was waiting. I do not know what it is waiting for. I am trying not to think about the fact that I am the only variable on this world that has changed recently. I pulled the tactical documentation I had stored on my data slate. Expeditionary Standard, the kind of Tyranid threat assessment that circulates through Departamento Munitorum channels, heavily redacted, the specifics of xenobiology stripped out and replaced with combat-relevant data. Range of weapons organisms, command beast battlefield roles, synaptic web function in broad terms, the kind of broad terms that tell a soldier enough to understand why killing a synapse beast disrupts the swarm without telling them anything the Ordo Xenos considers sensitive. I read it. I had read it before. I had processed it in the course of my archival work, and I had the summary of it already somewhere in my knowledge, the way you carry documents you have handled without ever sitting down to study them. But I read it now differently, with a different question. Not, what does a Hive Tyrant do in battle? But, what does a Hive Tyrant do when there is no battle? The documentation did not address this question. The documentation was written for soldiers who would encounter Hive Tyrants in the context of an invasion, of a swarm, of a fleet, of the full cascading violence of a Tyranid consumption event in progress. The documentation assumed conflict. It assumed you were already in the battle and needed to know how to survive it. It did not account for this, for a world already consumed, a network already established, and one creature remaining while the fleet moved on, or held position, or did whatever fleets do in the long intervals between consumption cycles. It did not account for what the command beast does when the commanding is over and the world is being processed and there is nothing left that requires its direction, except me. There is one thing in the tactical documentation that I keep returning to. A single line in a section on Hive Tyrant function that reads, in the dry, stripped language of military assessment, Hive Tyrants are not merely battlefield commanders, but extensions of the Hive mind's will, capable of independent strategic assessment when operating beyond direct synaptic range. Independent strategic assessment. I read this and I thought about the Tyrant standing in the rain. The quality of that stillness, the patience of it, a patience I could feel at 400 meters that had a physical quality to it, that pressed against the distance between us like something with weight. Assessment. It is assessing. This is what it has been doing since I landed, and possibly before I landed, possibly from the moment the shuttle entered the atmosphere, possibly from before that, if the synaptic web is what the documentation suggests it is. Receiving data, processing it, determining what I am, what I represent, what the optimal response to my presence in this world would be. It has not yet completed that determination. That is why I am alive. Not because it missed me, not because I am hidden or defended or too dangerous to approach, because the calculation is still running, because I am an input in an assessment that has not yet produced an output. When the assessment completes, when it reaches whatever conclusion the hive mind's will directs it toward, the waiting will end. I do not know what end the waiting will have. At 1600 I looked out the viewport. The valley was empty. The rain had stopped. The grey light lay flat and even across the dust and the ridge and the exposed rock, and there was nothing in the northern end of the valley, no massive stillness at the ridge base, no sense of presence at 400 meters. I felt, and I am writing this accurately, I am not reaching for dramatic effect. I felt worse. When it was visible, I knew where it was. I knew the distance. I knew the direction. When it was visible, the situation was contained within the specific horror of a known quantity at a known position. Now I was looking at an empty valley and I did not know where it was, and the Auspex, when I checked it, showed one return. Mine. Just mine. No cycling. No 17 to 11 to 1. just a single steady return at the center of the display, the same way it had shown before this all began, back on the first morning when I had cycled the unit and found what I took for malfunction and had chosen deliberately to leave unexamined. And I sat with that for a moment, one return, and I thought about what I had learned in the past 4 days, about the network, about the nodes, about the way the biological architecture of this world threaded everything, rock, substrate, dust, with the filaments of a system that was, in some sense I was only beginning to understand, all one thing, all connected, all of it in some sense, the presence of the thing that directed it. If the network is everywhere, if the network is the Hive Tyrant's sensory field made physical, its awareness distributed through the filaments, the way a mind is distributed through a nervous system, then the Auspex showing one return does not mean there is only one living thing on this world. It means the other thing on this world is not separate from the world. It means I have been inside it since I landed. I looked at the grey valley. I looked at the Auspex. I looked at my hands and the grey dust on my gloves from 3 days of surface survey, and the faint warmth, so faint, so easy to dismiss, still present beneath the shuttle floor. I thought of it standing in the rain this morning, the absolute stillness of it, the way it had been facing me with the patience of something that has decided to wait and has all the time available to it that waiting requires. And then I wrote the line I have not been able to look at since I wrote it. I wrote, "I think it wants something." And then I looked up at the viewport and the empty valley and the grey sky above it. And I wrote, "I think it might want it from inside me." End of log entry. Day 4. Status: alive. Direct contact confirmed. The subject is present in this world. Nature of interest in my presence: unknown. I have not left the shuttle since 0900. The Auspex shows one return. I have stopped finding that reassuring. I dreamed of the Norn Queen last night. I am not a psyker. I have never been tested, never flagged, never gifted. Which means one of two things. Either the dreams are not mine, or they were always mine, and I never knew until now. Chapter 5. Synaptic Pressure. I dreamed of the Norn Queen last night. I am not a psyker. I want to establish that clearly before I write anything else, because what follows requires that context, and because I have been thinking about it since I woke up, and the thinking has not made it better. I have never been tested, never flagged, never demonstrated the markers that the Imperium's mechanisms watch for. No bleeding, no fugues, no unwanted perceptions, no moments of knowledge I could not account for. None of the small, terrifying signs that the Scholastica Psychana trains its screeners to find. 12 years of service in environments where psyker activity would have been noted, reported, acted upon. 12 years of nothing. I am not a psyker, which means one of two things. Either the dream was not mine, was not generated by my own mind, was not the product of stress and isolation, and 4 days of escalating wrongness, pressing on a brain that has not slept properly since landing. Either it came from somewhere else, was placed, was received the way a signal is received by an instrument that did not know it was tuned to that frequency, or it was always mine. The capacity was always there, latent, untriggered, waiting for the specific stimulus that would bring it forward. And the stimulus is here. I have been sitting with both interpretations for 6 hours, and I cannot determine which one is more frightening, and I cannot determine which one is true. And I am beginning to suspect that the distinction may not matter as much as I would like it to. The dream was not violent. I want to be precise about this because when I try to explain it, and I am trying to explain it, because it is in the log now, and the log is a record, and records require completeness. The first assumption is violence, that I dreamed of something terrible and am calling it by a name to give it containment. It was not violent. It was not even, in the conventional sense, frightening. What it was vast. I was aware of a presence, not a figure, not a form I could describe in terms of shape or feature, but a presence in the way that gravity is a presence, in the way that deep water is a presence beneath a boat. Something enormous and patient, and entirely without the quality that I would call attention, in the human sense. Not attending to me, not focused on me, not aware of me as a specific thing, but present, filling the space the way cold fills a room, not directed, not intentional, simply the dominant condition of the environment. And within that presence, or threaded through it, was information. That is the closest word. Not images, not language, not the narrative structure of a human dream. Information in the way that mathematics is information, pure, cold, entirely without emotional content, describing things in terms of their properties and relationships and values. And the things it was describing were... I cannot write what the things were. I have tried twice. I wrote several lines and then I stopped and looked at what I had written and deleted it. Not because it was incoherent, because it was coherent, because it made a specific and terrible sense, and the sense it made was not human, and I do not want it in the log, because I do not want it anywhere outside my head, where it is already somewhere I cannot remove it from. I woke at 0340. The shuttle was dark. I lay still and performed the inventory. Sound, smell, surface. And all of it was normal. And the normality of it was somehow the most disorienting thing, that the shuttle was just the shuttle, and the silence was just the silence, and nothing had changed in the external environment to account for what had just happened inside my skull. I wrote in the log, disturbed sleep, vivid dreaming, attributed to stress and environmental factors. Then I lay in the dark for a long time. Then I got up and added in the margin, this is not accurate. Day 5 in this world. I have developed a routine, not because the routine serves any tactical purpose. I am increasingly uncertain what tactical purpose looks like from inside this situation, but because routine is a structure, and structure is a substitute for control when control is not available. 0600. Instrument checks, atmospheric readings, log update. 0800. Survey on foot, limited radius, never beyond 500 meters from the shuttle. 1200. Return to shuttle, analysis of morning data. 1400. Equipment maintenance, ration consumption, secondary log update. 1800. Final perimeter check from the shuttle viewport. 2100. Attempt sleep. The routine has been degrading. Not in the sense that I am failing to perform the tasks. I am performing them. I am performing them with the deliberate attention of someone who understands that the performance is the point. But they are taking longer. The instrument checks that should take 20 minutes are taking 40 because I find myself stopping, sometimes, in the middle of a procedure, and standing with the instrument in my hand, and being unable to account for the pause when it ends. Not losing time. I do not believe I am losing time. I am watching the chronometer, and the chronometer is consistent. But losing focus in a way that has a specific quality to it. Not the unfocused drift of fatigue, which I know well, which has a soft and soluble character. Something more particular. Something that feels, and I am writing this carefully, like interference. Like trying to hold a thought in a room where someone else is also speaking. The morning survey on day 5 took me east for the first time. I had been working north and northwest in previous surveys, following the ridge and the network filaments, and I had not gone east because the eastern end of the valley offered no obvious features of interest, and because, I am going to write this honestly, because the Auspex returns, in the first days, had oriented more strongly to the north. I had been unconsciously avoiding the eastern approach. I am writing that down because I noticed it this morning, and I think it is worth documenting. The pattern of my surveys has not been random, and it has not been entirely deliberate. I have been moving in directions that felt natural, that presented themselves to my planning as the obvious choices, and I have not questioned this because each choice had adequate tactical justification on its face. This morning I noticed the pattern and I went east. The eastern end of the valley is lower. The terrain drops perhaps 30 meters over the course of half a kilometer, a gradual slope that pulls the grey dust in drifts against the exposed rock formations. The rock here is different, older looking, more massive, the kind of deep substrate that has not seen surface exposure in a geological age. And the network is heavier here, denser. The filaments I had found threading hairline fractures in the ridge rock were nothing. Here the growth was structural, occupying fissures wide enough to put my hand into, branching into formations that rose above the surface in places, the red-brown of them vivid against the grey even in the flat light. I documented this. I took samples. I measured temperatures. The warmth here was significantly higher than at the campsite node, enough to register clearly on my instruments without close approach. And then I found the secondary nodal structure, larger than the first, perhaps 5 meters across, and taller, almost 2 meters of proud biological mass, the surface of it moving in a slow, rhythmic expansion and contraction that I stood at 15 meters and watched for some time before I could name what it was doing. Breathing. It was breathing, not metaphorically. The expansion-contraction cycle was respiratory in character, an intake, a hold, a release, the intervals between them longer than any human breath, but unmistakably the same mechanism. This mass of biological network material was processing the atmosphere, taking something from the air and incorporating it and releasing the remainder. I stood at 15 meters and I watched it breathe, and I thought about the dream, about the vast presence, the information with no emotional content, the way it described things in terms of their properties and values. I thought about what the properties and values of a living organism would look like from inside that cognition, what a human body would look like, broken into its components, the chemical composition of it, the energy content, the complexity of its neural architecture, the specific nature of its genetic material, what it would mean, in that cold and mathematical language, to assess those properties and find them interesting. Find one of them, specifically, very interesting. I had been standing at 15 meters for, I checked my chronometer, 23 minutes. I could not account for the first 11 of them. I returned to the shuttle at 11:30, and I ran a full personal medical diagnostic with the kit from the survival supplies. This took 40 minutes. The results were within normal parameters on every measure I could test without laboratory support. Blood pressure, heart rate, temperature, basic neurological response tests. I recorded all of it. Then I sat and thought about what a field medical kit cannot test for. There is a concept in the limited Ordo Xenos material I have handled, not detailed, not technical, referenced obliquely in the language of classified documentation that has had its specifics removed, of what prolonged proximity to Tyranid synapse creatures does to human neurological function. The documentation does not call it contamination. It does not call it influence. The word it uses is pressure, synaptic pressure. The description is brief. Prolonged exposure to active synaptic web nodes may produce neurological effects in proximate human subjects, particularly those with latent or unregistered psychic sensitivity. Effects are cumulative, and should be considered irreversible beyond early intervention threshold. Irreversible. Beyond the early intervention threshold. I read this documentation 18 months ago in the course of processing a Departamento Munitorum intelligence summary. I read it and filed it and moved on to the next document. It was one line in a classified summary that I was processing, not studying, and it had no operational relevance to my assignment at the time. It has operational relevance to my assignment now. I thought about the early intervention threshold, what that would mean here, practically. What intervention would look like on a dead world with a shuttle and a las pistol and 16 days of rations and no Vox signal that carries further than the edge of the atmosphere. I did not find a useful answer to this question. I found a different question instead. The documentation specifies latent or unregistered psychic sensitivity as a particular vulnerability. I have 12 years of service with no flagged psychic activity. This has always meant one thing to me. I am not a psyker. Not latent, not borderline, not anywhere on the spectrum that the Imperium's testing mechanisms are designed to detect. But the Imperium's testing mechanisms are designed to detect a specific range of expression. They are calibrated to find what the Scholastica Psychana has historically found. The markers that present in the conventional way, in the context the screeners are trained to screen for. They are not, as far as I know, calibrated for whatever the hive mind finds interesting. Whatever the hive mind, encountering one surviving organism on a fully processed world, has decided is worth preserving. It's worth studying. I did not go out in the afternoon. At 1800 I looked at the valley from the viewport. The light was failing. What passed for dusk on this world, the grey deepening toward a darker grey, the shadows flattening rather than lengthening, as though the world could not manage the full mechanics of a normal evening. The valley was empty to the eye. The Auspex showed one return. I ate. I updated the log. I performed the tasks of the routine, and the routine held, and I was almost grateful for the holding of it. At 2100 I settled to sleep. At 2100 and perhaps 30 seconds, I was aware, not in the manner of sound, not in the manner of any physical sensation I can cleanly name, of something attending to the shuttle, not pressing against it, not examining it from outside, something more interior than that. Something that was aware of the shuttle the way you are aware of a container when you are inside it. From the inside, with the specific knowledge of a thing that knows the shape of what contains it, because it is everywhere inside the shape. I lay still. I thought, this is anxiety. This is the product of 5 days of accumulated wrongness, of poor sleep and escalating dread and a dream I cannot account for. This is my mind generating sensation from pressure, which is a known phenomenon, which has a name and a literature, and no supernatural content whatsoever. I lay still and thought this very carefully, and then I fell asleep, which I should not have been able to do, because I was not tired. The routine had been restful. The afternoon had been still. I had slept badly the previous night, but not so badly that sleep should have come this quickly, this completely, like something closing over me, like something lowering a light, and I dreamed. And the dream was not new. It was the same vast presence, the same cold information without emotional content, but it was closer. The quality of it had changed, not in the content but in the proximity, the way the same sound changes when its source moves nearer. The same sound but filling more space now, more of the available space, more of the space that I was also occupying. And within the information, I found, I don't know how to say this accurately, I'm going to write it, and it will sound like the account of a person who has lost their grip on the boundary between internal and external experience, and I am aware of how it will sound, and I am writing it anyway. Within the information, I found something familiar, not something I recognized from outside, something I recognized from inside, something that had the specific character of my own thought patterns, the way I structure an analysis, the particular sequence in which I approach a problem, the rhythm of the way I think, present in the information, present in that cold, mathematical, Norn-Queen language, as though someone had been reading my cognition and had begun to reproduce it, as though the assessment had gotten intimate. I woke at 2:20 and reached immediately for the log and wrote without stopping for 11 minutes, and then I looked at what I had written. 6 pages, 6 full pages in my handwriting, dense and continuous, without a paragraph break, without an erasure, without any of the hesitations and corrections that characterize my normal log entries. I remember none of it. I read it. I am not going to reproduce it here because I think that reproducing it here would be a mistake, the nature of which I cannot fully articulate, but which I feel with a conviction that has the character of the only solid thing in my current environment. What it contained, what my hand had written while my mind was somewhere I cannot account for, was a technical description, precise, systematic, written in first person, in my syntax, with my vocabulary, using the specific kind of measured analytical language I have spent 12 years developing. A technical description of a human body, assessed as biomass, in terms of its component values, in terms of what it would yield, in terms of what made one particular specimen, one particular organism encountered on a processed world, one small and otherwise unremarkable biological unit, worth preserving beyond the standard consumption timeline. What made it interesting? What made it, in the cold mathematics of the Norn-Queen's cognition, something to be kept? I read it once, then I turned to a new page, and I wrote, very small, in the corner of the otherwise empty page, the only thought I was capable of forming. It isn't just watching from outside. It's been inside already. It's been reading me. And I've been writing back. End of log entry. Day 5. Status: alive. Sleep: compromised. Neurological status: unknown. 6 pages of log written during unaccounted period. Content: classified. Reason for classification: I am not ready to know what it means that I could write it. The Auspex shows one return. I have started wondering if that return is still me. There is a difference between being watched and being studied. I understand the difference now. Being watched implies you might leave. Being studied implies you will not, and that the student has all the time they need. Chapter 6. The weight of being seen. There is a difference between being watched and being studied. I understand the difference now in a way I could not have understood it 7 days ago, before this world, before the grey and the silence and the 6 pages I cannot account for. I understood it the way you understand the difference between 2 words that seem similar, intellectually, definitionally, with the flat comprehension of a thing learned from a text rather than lived into. I understand it differently now. I understand the way cold is different when it is inside you rather than around you. Being watched implies you might leave. It implies a watcher who tracks your movement because your movement matters to them, because where you go affects what they do, because your continued existence is a variable in their behavior. Being watched has a quality of contingency. The watcher adjusts, the watcher responds. There is a relationship implied, however terrible, however asymmetrical. You matter to the process. Being studied implies you will not leave. Not because you are prevented, though that may also be true, but because the study does not require your participation. You are not a variable in the study. You are the subject of it. The study proceeds whether you move or stay, whether you resist or acquiesce, whether you understand what is happening or die without ever understanding it. The study has its own timeline, its own criteria, its own conclusion that it is moving toward at the pace it has decided upon. You are the specimen. You do not get to have opinions about the methodology. Day 6 began with the Auspex. I have started each day with the Auspex since the second morning, and the ritual of it has taken on a quality that I recognize from the outside as superstitious. I check it the way people check things they cannot control. Not because the checking changes anything, but because the information, even terrible information, is preferable to uncertainty. I am a person who has always preferred terrible information to uncertainty. This is either a strength or a flaw, depending on the circumstance, and on day 6 of this situation, I am not certain which it is. The Auspex showed one return. Mine. Steady, singular, the clean, unambiguous return of a single biological unit at the center of the sweep radius. No cycling, no 17, no pattern. This has been the case since day 4, since the Tyrant appeared in the valley and the Auspex simplified, and I have written in previous entries that I have stopped finding it reassuring. What I have not written, what I am writing now because I think the log requires it, because I think accuracy is the only thing I am still reliably capable of, is that I have begun to find it sinister in a specific way. The cycling was unsettling because it implied something I could not explain. The stillness is unsettling because I have begun to understand what it might mean. If the network is the Tyrant's sensory field made physical, if the filaments threading the substrate beneath me are, in some functional sense, an extension of its cognition distributed through the world, then the Auspex reading the network would read it as part of the world, not as a separate life sign, not as the 17 returns that appeared in the early days when I was not yet inside the network's active zone, when I was at its periphery and the instrument could still distinguish between the creature and its extensions. Now I am deep inside the active zone. The network is everywhere beneath me, around me, in the rock and the dust and the grey processed air. The Auspex shows one return that encompasses everything in this world that is alive. I am the interruption in it, the foreign element, the thing that does not belong to the network, but exists within its field, the way a stone exists in water, present, bounded, distinct, entirely surrounded. This is what one return means. I think I have known this for 2 days and have been writing about it. At 900, I made the decision to provoke a response. I want to document this decision carefully because I think it will look, from the outside, from the perspective of whoever reads this log, if anyone reads this log, like either a rational tactical choice or a symptom of deteriorating judgment, and I am honestly not certain which it was. What I can document is the reasoning as it presented itself to me at the time, which was this: I did not know what the Tyrant wanted. I did not know why it was waiting. I did not know what the assessment was assessing toward, what conclusion it was approaching, what the output of its study of me would be when it came. And this uncertainty, the specific uncertainty of a subject who does not know what the study is for, was becoming, I believed, more damaging than any information a provoked response might generate. I needed data.
I took the last pistol, and I walked out of the shuttle at 0917.
The valley was still. The grey light was even, sourceless, the same flat illumination that this world had maintained since I landed, as though the sky was not so much overcast as simply depthless, not hiding a sun, but substituting for one, producing light without origin or direction. I walked north, 400 meters north, to the approximate position where I had seen the Tyrant on the 4th morning. It was not there. I stood in the place where it had stood, and I looked at the ground, There were no prints. The grey dust here was not disturbed in any way that my eye could detect, which meant either that something of that mass could move across this substrate without leaving the marks that mass should leave, or that the dust had settled over the prints in the 4 days since, or that I was not standing in exactly the right place. I crouched and examined the ground at close range and found nothing, and then I stood and looked at the ridge and the valley floor and the grey everywhere of it. I raised the las pistol. I fired once, into the open air above the ridgeline. The shot went wide into the grey sky, and the crack of it was extraordinary. I had not heard a loud sound since landing. The world had contained nothing but silence, and my own voice, and the faint mechanical sounds of the shuttle and instruments, and the crack of the las pistol discharge hit the ridge and bounced back and bounced again, and the echo of it went on for longer than it should have, rolling around the valley in the still air until it faded. I stood in the silence that followed. I waited. Nothing moved, nothing changed. The grey light held. The ridge was still. I fired again, and then something changed, and it was not what I expected, and it was not visible, and it was not something I can describe using the vocabulary of external events, because it did not happen outside me. I was standing in the valley with a las pistol in my hand when I became aware, with the sudden and complete certainty of a physical sensation, of the way you become aware of heat when you have moved close enough to a flame, that something was attending to me. Not for the first time, not new, but differently. The attention that had been present as background, as the constant, low, almost subsensible quality of the studied subject being studied, sharpened, focused. The way a lens focuses, gathering scattered light and concentrating it to a point. Something that had been ambient became directed. It was not pleasant. The nearest comparison I can make, and I make it with the caveat that comparison is inadequate, that the instrument of comparison is the human nervous system, and the human nervous system was not designed to be on the receiving end of what I am trying to describe. The nearest comparison is the feeling of a light being turned on in a room you were sitting in darkness. Not the light itself, the moment of the light, the sudden total elimination of the shadow that had been, until that instant, the condition of your existence, the loss of the dark that you had forgotten you were in. I was seen, completely and specifically, and without any remainder. I stood in the valley and I was seen. I walked back to the shuttle. I sealed the lock. I sat down. I reached for the log, and I found that I could not immediately write, which is unprecedented. In 12 years and 5 previous days in this world, I have always been able to write. Writing is what I do with experience. It is how I process and contain and continue. The inability to do it felt like a structural failure, like trying to perform a reflex that the nervous system has temporarily suspended. I sat with this for several minutes. Then I wrote, "Provocation attempt 0917. Discharged weapon twice into open air above ridgeline." I stopped. Then, no visible response. I stopped again. Then I wrote the thing that was sitting under everything else, that I had been writing around since I walked back from the valley, that I could feel the shape of even before I found the words for it. Fired at 0917. By 0940, I was back in the shuttle. 23 minutes. The walk takes 12. I looked at this. I cannot account for 11 minutes. I looked at the wall of the shuttle, the grey viewport, the instruments arranged on the console in the precise order I had arranged them, which was the order I always arranged them, which had the familiarity of any repeated gesture made automatic. The weapon was holstered when I returned. I do not remember holstering it. And then the last thing, the thing I wrote and did not look at again. I fired twice. I counted. 2 shots. But when I checked the power cell after returning, 3 charges had been expended. I do not know when I fired the 3rd time. I do not know what I fired at. The rest of day 6 I spent performing the routine with the mechanical fidelity of someone who understands that the routine is now the only architecture standing between them and something they cannot name. Instrument checks, log updates, equipment maintenance. The tasks are arranged in their sequence like a wall built from the inside of a room, each brick placed carefully against the one before it, the wall not keeping anything out so much as providing the builder with something to do with their hands. At 1400 I ate. At 1600 I began noticing the faces. This is difficult to write, and I am going to write it anyway because the log is a record, and the record is complete, or it is nothing. At 1600 I became aware that when I closed my eyes, in the ordinary way, the momentary way, the way you close your eyes to think or to rest, or simply because the body performs that motion without intention, when I closed my eyes I could see faces. Not clearly, not with the resolution of an image or a vision, more the way you see shapes in darkness. The visual cortex generates patterns from noise. But faces, specific faces, people I knew. My sister, a commanding officer I served under 4 years ago. The man who trained me, commissariat attached, told me that the act of writing was the act of imposing order on chaos. A clerk I worked alongside for 3 years and whose name I cannot now. I closed my eyes and I saw his face and reached for his name and found nothing. Not a blurred name, not a name on the edge of recall. The space where his name had been was clean, smooth, as if the name had never been written there. I tried another. The commanding officer, rank, face, the specific quality of his voice when he was displeased, all of it present. His name, clean space. My sister, her face, the way she looked the last time I saw her, 12 years ago on a transit station in the Obscura sector. The expression she wore which I have never found the precise word for. It was there, exact and vivid. Her name. I said it aloud. I did not hear myself say it. I said it and the shuttle's silence took it the way this world took everything. Completely. Leaving nothing. I looked at my hands for a long time. Then I picked up the log and I wrote her name at the top of a new page. I wrote it and looked at it, and the letters were correct. They assembled the right shape. The name was there on the page, and I knew it was right. But reading it felt like reading a word in a language I had studied but did not speak. The sound of it, the meaning of it, the weight that a specific name has when it belongs to someone specific. That was not present. I was reading a label. The person the label belonged to was somewhere I could not reach. I thought about this for a long time. I thought about what memory is, in the biological sense, what it is made of, where it lives, how it is stored and retrieved, electrochemical, protein encoded, physical in the final analysis. Memory is a physical thing. It has mass and location and biological composition. It exists in the tissue of the brain the way a note exists on paper, and like a note on paper it can be. I stopped this line of thinking. I started it again because stopping it was not the same as it not being true. Memory is biomass. Memory is protein and electrochemical signal, and the accumulated biological content of a life of experience, encoded in tissue, and tissue is what the hive mind consumes, and the consumption is precise. And what I felt in the valley this morning was the specific concentrated attention of something that has been studying me for 6 days and has now, in response to a provocation, decided to. I stopped again. I breathed. I wrote memory loss, names, selective, recent onset. I wrote, this began after the valley. I wrote, I do not think this is a coincidence. And then, because I am thorough, because I am methodical, because I have spent 12 years building the habit of completeness in documentation, and the habit has not yet been fully consumed along with everything else. Weapons discharge, 3 charges expended, 2 accounted for, 1 unaccounted for, occurring during an 11-minute gap in conscious memory. I fired at something. Something did not respond, or something's response was not what I was looking for. Or something's response was this: the names of the people I love going out like lights, one by one, and nothing I can do about it from inside the specimen jar. End of log entry. Day 6. Status: alive. Memory integrity: compromised. Extent: unknown. Prognosis: I have stopped trying to write that word. The Auspex shows 1 return. Outside, the valley is still. I think it is satisfied with today's session. I think it learned something. I think whatever it learned, it took with it. And what it left behind is the shape of what it took. Clean edges, no blood, just like the boot. I stopped being afraid on the 9th day, not because anything improved, because fear requires a self to protect, and I am no longer certain I am the only one using this body. Chapter 7. What remains? When fear runs out. I stopped being afraid on the 9th day. I want to be precise about this because I think the precision matters, and because I am aware that the statement sounds like a kind of progress, like something that might appear in the account of a person who had found steadiness, who had moved through fear into some more functional state on the other side of it. Acceptance, perhaps. Adaptation. The particular equanimity of a soldier who has been in the field long enough that the abnormality has become the condition of existence, and the nervous system has recalibrated accordingly. It is not that. I stopped being afraid because fear requires a self to protect. It requires a boundary, the membrane between inside and outside, between what is me and what is not me, between the thing that is afraid and the thing it is afraid of. Fear is a response to threat, and threat is defined as something that could damage what you are, and what you are must first be a coherent thing before damage to it is meaningful. I am no longer certain I am a coherent thing. I am no longer certain I am the only one using this body. And in the absence of that certainty, fear has nothing to stand on. It is not that the threat has diminished. The threat is exactly what it has been, exactly what it has been growing into. The slow and patient study of something that does not experience urgency and therefore cannot be rushed. The threat is unchanged. I am what has changed. And what has changed in me has changed the relationship between me and fear in a way I could not have predicted and cannot, from the inside, fully describe. What I can describe is the 7th day and the 8th and the 9th and what happened on each of them, and what I found at the end of them where fear used to be. Day 7. The morning survey took me south for the first time. I had not gone south, had not thought to go south, had not considered it. And when I looked at my survey map and noticed the gap, the unexamined southern quadrant of my operational radius, I felt something that was not quite a surprise. It was more like the feeling of finding a blind spot, the specific discomfort of realizing that your vision has limits you were not aware of, that the picture you thought was complete had edges you could not see, because they were the edges of what you could see. I went south. The southern terrain was lower, flatter, a broad plain that extended beyond my survey radius in both directions, featureless, except for the occasional dark intrusion of rock breaking through the grey dust. The network was thinner here, present, always present, but finer, the filaments more widely spaced, less of the structural mass I had found in the east. Peripheral tissue, the outer reach of a system whose density increases as you move toward the center. I was moving away from the center. I walked south for 40 minutes, documenting, taking readings, performing the routine of the survey with the methodical attention I had constructed around it. And then I stopped, because the Auspex had changed. Not to 17, not to anything I had seen before. The Auspex showed 2 returns, mine at the center, and one other 200 meters south, stationary, Kidasu, the signal strength registering at a level that my experience of the past 9 days had taught me to associate with something very large. I looked south. The plain was flat and empty and grey, and I could see for at least 500 meters in good visibility, and there was nothing in the southern plain that my eyes could find. The Auspex showed it at 200 meters. I stood very still, and then I understood, with the cold mechanical precision of a conclusion that has been assembling itself across several days and has finally reached completion, what the 2 returns meant. Why, for the first time since day 4, the Auspex was showing more than one life sign. It was not that the Tyrant had appeared. It had been there. It had been present for as long as the network was present, distributed through the filaments, present in the substrate beneath my boots. The Auspex was showing 2 returns because it was no longer reading me as part of the network. It was reading me as separate from it. And the Tyrant, or the network, or the thing the network was an extension of, the intelligence that the whole vast biological architecture of this world served and embodied, had been moved, had been shifted in the instrument's classification from the category of world to the category of organism, from background to foreground. Something had changed in how it was presented to the instrument, or something had changed in me, and the instrument was reading the difference. I stood in the southern plain for a long time, with the Auspex in my hand, showing 2 returns, and I felt the precise absence of fear that I have already described. The clean, architectural absence of it. The space where the fear would have been, if the self were still intact enough to generate it. What I felt instead was something I have been trying to name for 3 days. The closest I have come is this. I felt observed. Not watched, in the sense I described before, not the passive tracking of a thing being monitored. Observed in the way that an experiment is observed, with interest, with the specific quality of attention that accompanies the moment when a result begins to emerge from a process, when the data starts to cohere into a shape the researcher has been expecting, or hoping for, or has been uncertain about until now. I felt like a result. Day 8. I woke at 300, and I was standing in the middle of the shuttle, not sitting up, not in the process of rising, standing, fully upright, in the center of the shuttle floor, facing the sealed outer lock. My boots were on. I do not sleep in my boots. My hand was at my side, and the fingers of it were... I looked at them, in the dark of the shuttle, turning my hand in front of my face. The fingers were positioned as though they had just released something. The specific relaxation of a grip just opened. The muscle memory of having held something that I was no longer holding. I looked at the floor. I looked at the lock. I looked at the console. And everything on the console was as I had left it. Instruments in their sequence. Log open to the last entry. Power levels nominal. I checked the lock. Sealed. Had been sealed, the indicator showed, continuously. I stood in the center of the shuttle, and I breathed, and I performed the inventory. Sound, smell, surface. And everything was normal. And the normality was the problem. Because I was standing in the center of the shuttle in my boots, with the muscle memory of a released grip, and no account of how I had gotten here. I sat down. I reached for the log. I wrote the time, and I wrote what I had found when I woke. The boots and the posture and the hand. And then I turned back through the recent pages, looking for anything I might have written in the night. Nothing. The last entry was the one I had written before sleeping at 21:30, and between that and the blank page of 0300, there was nothing in my handwriting. I held this for a moment. Then I checked the last pistol. 2 charges have expended since I had last logged the count. The count I had logged before sleeping. Full cell. I sat with this for a very long time. I have been trying to construct a narrative of day 8 that is accurate, and I am finding it difficult, and I think the difficulty is itself accurate and should be documented as such. Day 8 is not a continuous account. It is a series of moments that I can verify, that I have physical evidence for, in the log, in the instrument readings, in the state of my equipment, with gaps between them that have the quality not of lost time, but of edited time, of a sequence from which certain frames have been removed with the same clean precision that something was removed from the ankle of the boot on the first day. What I have. At 0300 I was standing in the shuttle with a recently released grip and 2 expended charges I cannot account for. At 0600 I was at the console performing instrument checks. This is verified by the log entry, which is in my handwriting, which documents normal readings. Between 300 and 600 I have nothing. At 1100 I was 200 meters east of the shuttle. I know this because I was holding the survey instruments, and they were reading eastern coordinates, and I had documentation in my hands that I had apparently been writing. Measurements, observations, the standard format of a survey log, in my handwriting, complete and coherent, describing what I was observing in the eastern terrain. I had no memory of leaving the shuttle. At 1400 I was at the secondary nodal structure, the larger one I had found on day 5, at a distance of perhaps 3 meters. 3 meters. I had not approached within 15 on any previous visit. The previous entries specifically documented the 15-meter boundary, the reasoning behind it, the combination of training protocol, and something older than training that had insisted on the distance, 3 meters. I was crouching. My gloved hand was extended toward the surface of the nodal structure, and I became aware of this in the moment before contact, became aware of the whole posture, the proximity, the extended hand, and I pulled back and stood and walked away at the measured pace of a person who has assessed their situation and determined that running serves no tactical purpose. My hand was warm, through the glove, warm in the specific way that the nodal structure was warm. I did not look at it. I walked back to the shuttle. At 1900 I was in the shuttle. This I have continuous memory of, from some time in the late afternoon onward. I sat and ate and updated the log, and performed the routine, and the routine held, and I was grateful for the holding. Between 600 and 1900 I have gaps, 3 of them, of unknown duration. 3 moments of emergence into a continuity I had apparently been maintaining without being present for it. This is day 8. Day 9. I am writing this as it happens, or as close to as it happens as the writing allows, because I have decided that continuous documentation is the only mechanism I have left for maintaining the thread of my own account. Instrument checks. Normal. Auspex shows 2 returns, mine and the other stationary to the southeast at approximately 300 meters. I note the distance. It has been decreasing. On day 7, it was 200 meters to the south. On day 8, when I noted it, it was variable. I could not get a consistent reading, which I logged as instrument error, and am now logging as something else. Today it is 300 meters to the southeast. The direction changes. The distance does not decrease in a straight line. It moves, not randomly. I have plotted the positions I have logged over the past 3 days on the survey map, and the pattern of them describes a slow arc, a perimeter, a consistent radius from the shuttle, walking the circle of it, returning to positions it has occupied before, maintaining a distance that is close enough to constitute presence and far enough to constitute something I do not have a word for. Circumscription. It is circumscribing me. Not a siege, not a closing in. The radius is not decreasing. It is the same radius, walked again and again, the same distance maintained with the same patience, and I am at the center of it, and it is at the perimeter, and the perimeter is absolute. I am inside a boundary. I have been inside a boundary since I landed, I think. I just did not know the shape of it. At 1400 on day 9, I sat in the shuttle, and I tried to be afraid. I want to document this because I think it matters. I sat with the survey map in my hands, and the Auspex showing 2 returns, and the log open beside me, and I deliberately, consciously, tried to generate the response that the situation required. I catalogued the situation in the specific detailed way I have been cataloguing it for 9 days, and I tried to feel the appropriate response to the catalogue. Nothing. Not numbness. Not the flat absence of feeling that comes from overload when the nervous system has received more than it can process and has temporarily suspended response. This was more precise than that. The architecture of the fear response was present. I could trace it, could identify where it should have been connecting, the way you can trace a wire and identify the point where the circuit is broken. The architecture was intact. The current was not running. Because the current requires a self as its source. Because fear is the self's assessment of threat to itself. And the self that was sitting in the shuttle on day 9 with the survey map in its hands was, I am going to write this as accurately as I can, and I am going to acknowledge that accuracy may not be fully achievable from inside the thing I am trying to describe. The self was not entirely present, was not entirely locatable in the body that was sitting in the shuttle, was distributed somehow, extended, the way a signal extends beyond the device that generates it, growing thinner the further it travels, still present at distance, but no longer concentrated at source. I was still here. I was not only here, and the part of me that was not only here, the part that had been walking in the night and writing surveys in gaps and reaching toward nodal structures 3 meters away, that part did not experience what I was cataloguing as threat. That part was not scary, and it was growing. At 1600, I went outside. I did not decide to go outside. I became aware that I was outside, standing in the grey afternoon light with the shuttle sealed behind me, and I had the survey instruments in my hand and the last pistol in its holster, and I was facing southeast, toward the position the Auspex had shown this morning, 300 meters. I stood in the cold, still air, and I looked southeast, and I could not see anything, and I did not feel the absence of fear anymore, because I had stopped monitoring for it. And I was aware of myself standing there in a way that had the specific quality of being watched from slightly behind my own eyes, of being both the watcher and the watched, both the thing experiencing and the thing observing the experience, a doubling that had been growing incrementally since the first dream and had reached, today, a threshold I could not ignore. I took one step toward the southeast, then another. I stopped. I stood very still. I am stopping, I said aloud. The sound of my voice in the grey air was strange, too present, too particular, the voice of one specific person in a world that had been emptied of all particularity. I am stopping, I said again. Not to the valley, not to the distance or the grey sky or the 300-meter perimeter, to the part of me that had taken the steps. There was a pause. Then I turned around and walked back to the shuttle and sealed the lock behind me. The part that had taken the steps did not resist, which was either a victory or a test, and I do not know which. And I think not knowing is the point. I am writing this at 2200 on day 9, and I want to say something clearly while I am still able to say things clearly. while the part of me that writes this log is still the part that was trained, still the part that believes in the act of documentation, still the part that knows whose hands these are and whose voice this is, and whose 12 years of experience made these words the shape they are. I am still here. I am still here in the specific sense that I am choosing to say it, and choice requires a chooser, and the chooser is still located somewhere in the body, sitting in this shuttle. But something else is also here. I have been here, growing, for 9 days. And something else is not afraid and does not experience what I experience as loss, and does not mourn the names that are gone, and does not flinch from the warmth beneath the floor, or the arc of the perimeter, or the 3 meters from the nodal structure, or the 2 charges expended in the night. Something else is patience. It has learned patience from something very large and very old that knows how to wait. And I need to write this. I need to put it in the log, while the part of me that writes the log is still running. I am afraid that the patience is not a threat, that it is an offer, that somewhere in the 9 days of study, in the dreams and the lost hours and the 6 pages in my handwriting and the steps toward the southeast, what has been happening is not an invasion, is not a consumption, is something I do not have a word for, because the word for it does not exist in any language I know, because the experience of it has never been survived long enough for anyone to bring the word back. The Auspex shows 2 returns, but they are closer together than they were this morning, and I did not move. End of log entry. Day 9. Status. I have been sitting with that word for 4 minutes. Alive seems right. Alive seems wrong. Alive seems like a question that used to have a simpler answer. 2 returns. Closer than this morning. Something outside is patient. Something inside is learning to be. I am going to sleep now. I am not going to try to be afraid of what that means. I don't think I can afford what trying costs anymore. I found the other survivors today. What was left of them? They had not been killed. They had been processed, but I had been preserved. I have been trying since that moment, not to understand why. Chapter 8. The Biomass Calculus. I found the other survivors today. I want to write that sentence and sit with it for a moment before I write the next one, because the next one changes what the first one means, and once it is changed, it cannot be unchanged, and I think there is value in the last moment before the changing. The last moment of the first sentence standing alone, with the word survivors still meaning what it usually means. I found the other survivors today. What was left of them? They had not been killed. I need to establish that clearly, because killed implies a violence, implies a moment of termination, implies a relationship between cause and effect that is comprehensible within the framework of things I have been trained to assess and document. Killed is a word that belongs to the world I came from, where death has an event at its center, a moment, a threshold, a crossing. What I found was not that. What I found was process, completed process, its conclusion reached, its results present in the grey dust of the valley floor, in the manner of a document that has been filed. The information retained, the original no longer necessary. 3 of them. I found them in a shallow depression 2 kilometers northwest of the shuttle, a depression I had surveyed on day 2 and logged as geologically unremarkable. And they were unremarkable now in the sense that they were fully integrated, fully incorporated into the grey of the world, into the dust and the substrate, into the biological network that threaded everything. What remained was the shape of them, not the structure, not the tissue, not the biological content that made them people, rather than the idea of people. The shape. The pressed, precise outline of 3 human forms in the grey dust, each one complete, each one detailed in the way that a mold is detailed. the specific angle of a shoulder, the particular curve where a spine had pressed into the substrate, the shape of hands beside bodies. Complete outlines, empty, clean. No residue, no remains. Nothing that bled or decayed or left the evidence of a life concluding. Just the shapes, pressed into the world with the same precise, bloodless quality as the boot on the first day, the same quality as the separation at the ankle, the same quality as everything on this world that had been taken rather than lost. I stood over them for a long time. I thought about the other people who had made it off the Ascendant. The third person to reach the landing bay. I had not seen who it was. I had been focused on the shuttle, on the credentials, and the calm expression, and the getting out. Two others ahead of me. These shapes had the dimensions of the people they had been, and one of them, I measured it with my eyes, the specific proportion of height to shoulder width, the particular arrangement of the arms. One of them had the dimensions of someone who had moved with the deliberate efficiency of a person who knew exactly where they were going. A soldier. Someone trained like me. Someone who had assessed the situation on the command deck as I had, and had arrived at the same conclusion and had acted on it. Someone who had done everything right. I looked at the shape in the dust. I looked at my own hands. I thought, they did what I did. They landed where I landed, or near it. They survived the first hours, the first days perhaps. I thought, they are shapes in the dust. I thought, I am standing here looking at them. And then I made myself think the thought I had been building toward for 10 days, the thought I had been approaching from every direction and declining to arrive at. And I arrived at it. And it was this. Why? Why am I standing here? Not why in the existential sense, not the unanswerable, the cosmically indifferent non-answer of a universe that does not concern itself with the survival of specific organisms. Why in the operational sense? Why in the sense of a hive tyrant does not make errors of classification? A hive tyrant assessing biomass on a processed world and determining what to retain and what to consume does not misfile, does not accidentally preserve one organism while processing 3 others through some mechanical oversight or momentary inattention. There are no mechanical oversights. There is no momentary inattention. There is only the hive mind, and the hive mind's will expressed through the tyrant, and the tyrant's assessment, and the assessment's conclusion. The conclusion, in the case of 3 human organisms, was process. The conclusion in my case was preserve. I have been trying, since the moment I stood over those shapes in the dust, not to understand why. Trying, because understanding is a door, and I am not certain I want to know what is on the other side of it, and I am not certain I will be able to close it once I have opened it. But I am standing here, and the door is already open, and the log requires completeness, and the part of me that still maintains the log, and still believes in its completeness, is the part I am fighting to keep. And keeping it means using it, means doing what it does, means following the thought to where it goes. So, why? I pulled the tactical documentation on day 4 and I read it for battlefield function. I read it now. I have been reading it since I returned to the shuttle, sitting with it in a way I have not sat with a document since the early days of my archival training, when documents were not processed but studied, when the difference between those 2 things was still being taught to me. I read it now for something else, for what a hive tyrant does when the battle is over, for what the hive mind wants from a world after the consumption is complete. The documentation is sparse on this, for the reasons I noted on day 4. It was written for soldiers in active conflict, not for survivors on processed worlds, which is a population that has historically not produced much documentation. But there are fragments, oblique references in the Ordo Xenos material, in the assessments of worlds that were retaken after Tyranid consumption and surveyed by Imperial forces who found, rarely, but recorded when found, organisms that had been preserved. Not living in most cases by the time the survey teams arrived, but preserved in the sense of having been maintained in a specific state for a period after the world's consumption was otherwise complete. The documentation notes these cases without explanation. The Ordo Xenos assessments flag them as anomalies and move on. There is a single line in a xenobiological analysis attached to a post-consumption survey report that I read 3 times before I let myself believe I was reading it correctly. Preserved specimens show consistent markers of latent psychic sensitivity, unregistered at time of initial contact. Hypothesis: Hive mind demonstrates selective interest in organisms with undeveloped psychic potential. Mechanism and purpose unknown. Unregistered psychic sensitivity. Latent, undeveloped potential. I am going to write what this means as clearly as I can, because clarity is what the log requires, and because the part of me that maintains the log is. I can feel it. I can feel the border of it, the edge of the territory it controls inside me. And the territory has been shrinking for 9 days, and I do not know how much of it remains, and I am writing into the time I have left with it. The hive mind does not consume indiscriminately. This is known, is documented, is one of the few things the Ordo Xenos has published widely enough to reach standard tactical briefings. The hive mind assesses, categorizes, determines the value of biological material not only as raw biomass, but as genetic information, as the encoded history of a species' evolutionary development, as the biological record of adaptations accumulated over millions of years. The hive mind absorbs this information along with the biomass, incorporates it, uses it in the development of new bioforms, new organisms, new tools for future consumption. The hive mind is not a predator in the simple sense. It is a library that digests its acquisitions, and certain acquisitions are more valuable than others. A human with registered psychic ability is a known quantity. The markers are documented, the potential catalogued, the genetic basis understood in terms of what the hive mind has encountered before. Valuable, certainly, but known. A human with latent, unregistered psychic sensitivity is something else, something the standard catalogue does not contain, something that has developed, or is developing, along a pathway that the hive mind's existing records do not fully describe, something that represents not a known genetic expression, but a potential one, a direction, a trajectory, a seed. The hive mind does not want what I am. It wants what I might become. And between what I am and what I might become is a process, and the process requires time, and the time requires that I remain alive and intact and present on this world while the process runs. It isn't killing me. It is farming me. I sat in the shuttle for a long time after I understood this. I sat, and I looked at the wall, and I breathed the air that still tasted of nothing. Though I had stopped noticing the nothing, the way you stop noticing a sound that has been constant long enough. And I thought about the shapes in the dust, the 3 outlines, the pressed and empty forms of people who had done everything I had done, who had gotten off the ship and landed and survived the first hours, and who had been classified, assessed, determined to be biomass rather than potential, and processed accordingly, with the clean and total efficiency of a system that does not experience cruelty, because cruelty requires the enjoyment of suffering, and the hive mind does not experience enjoyment. It experiences optimization. It experiences the satisfaction, if that word applies, if any word applies, of a process correctly concluded. They were biomass. I was a seed, and a seed is not planted out of mercy. A seed is not preserved because the farmer cares about the seed. A seed is preserved because the farmer cares about the harvest. I thought about what the harvest would look like. I thought about the process that had been running for 10 days. The dreams, the lost hours, the 6 pages, the warmth through the shuttle floor, the steps toward the southeast in the grey afternoon, the names going out like lights. And I understood that the process was not the hive mind taking things from me. The process was the hive mind developing what was already there, cultivating it. The latent sensitivity that had never triggered in 12 years of service. Never triggered because the trigger required a specific stimulus, a specific pressure, a specific prolonged exposure to a psychic field of sufficient magnitude and the right character. It was triggering now. Had been triggering since I landed. The dreams were not intrusion. The lost hours were not possession. The 6 pages were not the hive mind writing through my hand. They were me. All of it was me. The part of me that had always been there, unregistered, undeveloped, waiting in the latent dark of an untriggered potential for the specific conditions that would bring it forward. The hive mind had not made me something new. It had found what was already in me and given it the conditions to grow. I sat with this for a very long time. Then I wrote, in the log, in the smallest handwriting I have used since I landed, in the corner of the page, in the manner of something I am not entirely sure I want to preserve, but cannot stop myself from writing. It isn't keeping me alive out of mercy. It is keeping me alive the way a farmer keeps a seed. The seed does not get to have opinions about the soil. Here is what I know about latent psychic potential, which is not much, which is the limited knowledge of an archivist who has processed Scholastica Psychana documentation in the course of her work and retained what she retained without understanding that she would one day need it. Latent potential, undeveloped, is inert. It produces nothing. It does nothing to the organism that carries it. The organism lives a normal life and dies a normal death, and the potential dies with them, unrealized, unregistered, a pathway that was present but was never walked. Developed potential is different. Developed potential is a live current. It connects the organism to the warp, to the immaterial realm that underlies and interpenetrates material space that the hive mind navigates in its own way, through the shadow that it casts across it, the suppression of other psychic activity that makes the warp around a Tyranid fleet into a dead space, a silenced space, a space from which the Emperor's light cannot reach, and into which prayer disappears without return. A developed psyche on a world inside the shadow in the warp is a thing the shadow touches directly. A thing the shadow touches directly is a thing the hive mind can access. A thing the hive mind can access is not a separate organism anymore. Not entirely. Not in the ways that matter. I thought about the part of me that took the steps toward the southeast, that released the grip in the night, that wrote 6 pages of cold technical assessment in my handwriting. I thought about how I had framed these things, as intrusion, as influence, as the hive mind pressing into me from outside. I thought about the seed, about how you cannot press something into a seed from outside. You can only give it soil and water and time, and what grows, grows from inside. At 1800, I looked at the eastern nodal structure on my survey map, the one I had found on day 5, the one I had approached to 3 meters on day 8 without remembering the approach. I thought about what a nodal structure is, what it does, not the biological mechanics of it. The mechanics I do not fully understand and cannot fully document. The function. A node in a network is a point of convergence and transmission, a place where signals gather and are distributed, a place where the network is most present, most concentrated, most alive. A place where, if you were very close to it, the network would be most able to reach you, and if you had latent sensitivity that the network was cultivating. A place where the cultivation would be most effective. I had been brought to 3 meters by the part of me that was not afraid, by the part that had been growing. I sat with this and I felt, and this is accurate, this is what I felt. I am documenting it as accurately as I can. I felt something that was not quite horror and was not quite wonder, and had elements of both and transcended both into something I still do not have a word for. The feeling of a thing that is happening to you that is enormous and that you did not choose, and that is, in some terrible and genuine sense, also you. That you are not the victim of, but the site of. The location where something is occurring that is larger than the location. I am what is happening. I am not separate from it. I am the process. And the process is almost complete. I am going to write one more thing before I close this entry, and then I am going to sit with it, and I am going to decide what to do with what I know. The hive mind remembers what it absorbs. This is in the documentation, in the biological assessments, in the theoretical frameworks built around the observations of what worlds look like after consumption, and what bioforms appear in subsequent hive fleet engagements that suggest the absorption of local genetic material. The hive mind incorporates, retains, does not consume and discard, but consumes and archives, building an ever larger library of biological information drawn from every world it has processed and every organism it has ever encountered. The 3 shapes in the dust, they are not gone. What they were is in the network, distributed through the filaments, encoded in the biological architecture of a processed world, present in the vast cold library of everything the hive mind has ever absorbed. They persist, in a form I cannot access and cannot name and cannot evaluate in terms of whether it constitutes survival or a worse form of death. They persist, and when my process completes, when whatever the hive mind is cultivating in me reaches the state it has been cultivating toward, when the seed becomes whatever a seed becomes, when the conditions are right, and the soil is good, and the farmer is patient, I will persist too, in a form I cannot access and cannot name and cannot evaluate. I sat with this for the remainder of the evening. At 2200 I wrote in the log, Day 10, tomorrow. I am going to make a decision about what to do with what I know. At 2230 seconds I added, I am going to write it down first. All of it. Everything I know, and everything I suspect, and everything the process has shown me that I cannot fully articulate but can gesture toward. I am going to write it while I still know whose handwriting it is. I am going to write it for whoever finds this. I am going to write it like it matters. Because the part of me that still believes it matters is the part I have left, and I am going to use it. All of it. Until there is nothing left to use. End of log entry. Day 10. Pre-entry note. Status: present. Mostly. The Auspex shows 2 returns. The distance between them is the smallest it has been. I looked at it for a long time. Then I put it away. Some instruments have told you everything they can. Some questions have only one answer, and the answer is already inside you, growing. Tomorrow I write the last entry I am certain will be mine. I want it to be worth reading. I want it to be true. I want whoever reads it to understand what happened here, not what was done to me, what I was, what this world made of what I was, what grows from a seed when the soil is patient and the farmer does not hurry, and whether what grows is still the seed, whether the seed survives its own flowering. I don't know the answer, but I know who to ask, and I think, by tomorrow, I will not be afraid of asking. If you are hearing this, you found the body, or what used to be the body. I am going to write one more entry, while I still know the difference between what I think and what I have been given to think. Chapter 9, one more entry. If you are hearing this, you found the body, or what used to be the body. I am aware that distinction may not be clear by the time you arrive, that what you find may require a moment of assessment before the word body applies or doesn't, and I want to prepare you for that. Not to soften it, I don't think it can be softened, but because preparation is the kindest thing I have left to offer, and I want to be kind. I find that I still want to be kind. This surprises me on day 11, when so much else that I wanted has simplified or gone. The kindness has stayed. I am holding on to it. I am going to write one more entry, while I still know the difference between what I think and what I have been given to think. The difference is smaller than it was this morning, smaller than it was an hour ago. I can feel it the way you feel the last of the light going. Not suddenly, not in a single moment you can point to and say, there. That was when, but gradually, the quality of it changing. The things that were visible in it becoming harder to resolve. The edges softening in ways that are almost beautiful if you do not think too carefully about what the softening means. I am going to write quickly. My name is Elia Voss. I was Sergeant-Archivist, 3rd Obscura Expeditionary, detached secondment to Rogue Trader Household Brenevar. I am 61 standard years after my birth on Tempestora Secundus in the Obscura sector. I have dark hair that has been going grey for 3 years, and I have a scar on my left hand from an equipment accident on my second deployment, and I prefer recaf to Amasec, and I have a sister whose name is on a page earlier in this log, and whose face I can still find when I close my eyes, though the finding takes longer than it did, and one day soon it will take longer than I have. I am writing these things down because they are mine, because they are the specific content of a specific person, and the specific person is what is at stake, and I want it on record that the specific person existed, that she was real, that she had a scar and a preference and a sister, and 12 years of service that she performed with care and a belief, inherited from a man she respected, that writing was the act of imposing order on chaos, that she believed this, until the chaos became large enough that order was no longer the right ambition, until the most honest thing she could do with the chaos was simply describe it, exactly, and trust the description to outlast the describer. This is that description. You are holding it. I need to tell you what I know, in the clearest language I can still manage, because I do not know how much longer I will be managing it, and because what I know is important in a way that extends beyond my own situation, in a way that might matter to someone, somewhere, who is making decisions that this information could improve. I know that this world is a Tyranid consumption site, partially processed, the biological network still active. I know that a Hive Tyrant has been present on this surface for the duration of my time here, present in the distributed sense, expressed through the network, and present in the physical sense as well, the massive and patient creature I saw in the valley on the 4th morning, standing in the ashen rain. I know that the shadow in the warp is total in this system. No signal has reached me from outside the atmosphere. No prayer I have attempted has produced anything I would call a response, which I document not as a spiritual observation but as a practical one. The channel is closed, the connection severed, the light that the faithful depend on absorbed into the vast darkness of the Hive mind's psychic suppression field. You are on your own here, if you are here. I hope you are not here. I know that I carry latent psychic sensitivity that was not registered in 12 years of standard Imperial screening. I know that the Hive mind identified this, assessed its value, and made a determination to preserve me while processing the other survivors for biomass. I know that the past 11 days have been a cultivation process, the deliberate development of that latent sensitivity through sustained exposure to the synaptic web, to the nodal structures, to the dreams that were not intrusion but development. Not the hive mind entering me, but the hive mind providing the conditions for something in me to grow. I know that the growth is nearly complete. I know this because I can feel it. The way you feel something that has been building for a long time when it reaches the threshold past which the building becomes the built thing. The way a wound feels when it has finished closing. Not healed, closed. There is a difference. I know that what I will be when the growth completes is not what I was. I do not know the precise shape of what I will be. I have been trying to look at it directly and finding that the looking is complicated by the thing I am looking at. That the instrument of examination is not separate from the subject of examination in the way it used to be. That I am not a reliable observer of my own transformation because I am the transformation. What I can tell you is this: it does not feel like death. I want to be careful with that, because I am aware that it not feeling like death is not the same as it not being death, and I am aware that the part of me doing the feeling has been changed by 11 days of psychic cultivation, and may not be the most reliable instrument for evaluating its own experience. So I am flagging it rather than claiming it, noting it in the log as an observation rather than a conclusion. It does not feel like death. It feels like a translation. I fired the last pistol this morning. Not at anything. Not at the Tyrant, which I have not seen in the valley since day 4, and which I have not attempted to see again. Though I know in the particular way that you know something you cannot explain through the senses that are doing the knowing, that it is close, closer than it has been. The perimeter has not closed, the circumscription has not tightened into siege, but the quality of the distance between us has changed, is less like the distance between two separate things, and more like the distance between two parts of a single larger thing.
I am not comfortable with that description.
I am writing it anyway because accuracy is what the log requires. I fired the last pistol at the grey sky and listened to the crack of it and the echo of it rolling around the valley. And I did it because I wanted to make a sound, to produce something loud and definite and unambiguous, a thing that had a clear cause and a clear effect and no metaphysical complexity at all. A charge expended, a beam discharged, an echo produced. Simple, causal, mine. The echo went on for a while. Then the silence came back. The silence in this world has changed since I landed. It no longer has the quality I described in the first entry, the quality of a room from which every object has been removed, a silence defined by the absence of things that should have been present. It has a different quality now, more like the silence between words, the silence that is part of language, that gives language its shape, that is not the absence of meaning, but a component of it. I sat in that silence for a long time. I thought about the man who taught me that writing was the act of imposing order on chaos. His face, his specific particular face, the set of it, the way he looked when he was making a point he considered important, I can still find it. It is still there. I am grateful for this in a way that I cannot articulate, and am not going to try. I thought about Tempestora Secundus, the smell of it, the specific atmospheric chemistry of the place where I grew up, which every world has, and which you never notice until you have spent enough time away from it that the memory of it becomes something you can examine. I can find that too, fainter than I would like, present. I thought about 12 years, the accumulation of them, the weight and texture of a life composed of specific experiences, specific choices, specific mistakes and corrections, and the gradual building of a person from the material those years provided. The person who stepped off a shuttle onto a grey dead world 11 days ago and began writing in a log because it was what she did when she did not know what else to do. That person is here. I want you to know that. Smaller than she was. Changed in ways she cannot fully account for. But here, in the handwriting, in the choice of words, in the habit of precision and the belief in the value of the record, here in the kindness that has stayed when so much else has gone. Here, for now. There are things I want to say to specific people and cannot say to specific people because the Vox is dead and the distances are absolute and some of the names I would need have been taken. But I am going to put them into the log, into the record, into the document that may outlast the person writing it, because the saying matters independent of the receiving. To my sister, whose name is on the earlier page, I thought about you on the first day when the world felt wrong and I needed something real to hold on to. You were real. You are real. Whatever happens here, whatever translation this is, the 12 years and the scar and the recaf and the specific way you looked at me on a transit station when I was leaving, none of that is cancelled. None of it can be cancelled. It happened. It is in the record of things that happened. The universe's accounting of what has existed will always contain it. To the man who taught me that writing was the act of imposing order on chaos, you were right, and you were also wrong, and I think you would appreciate the precision of that. Writing is the act of imposing order on chaos, and sometimes the chaos is large enough that the order it accepts is not the order you intended, not the tidy sequential account of events with a beginning and a middle and a conclusion, but something stranger and more honest than that. A record that is also a becoming, a document that changes as it is written, an act of order that contains carefully the chaos it cannot contain. This is that. You would have found it interesting. I find it interesting. Even now. The Tyrant has not come to me. I want to document this because I think it matters, and because I think whoever finds this log will expect the account of a creature that approached and acted and did the things that creatures in these accounts do. The Tyrant has not approached, has not acted in any visible physical sense in 11 days, has been present, patient. The quality of its presence changed as the days went on, moving from the ambient background pressure of something that was everywhere to something more particular, more directed, more specific, but always at a distance, always with the quality of something that is waiting for a process to complete, rather than completing it through action. It did not come to me. Something in me went to it. I think this is an important distinction. I think this is the thing that the Ordo Xenos documentation does not capture, has never captured, because it has never had the account of someone who experienced it from the inside. The cultivation is not imposition. It is not violation. The hive mind does not reach into the organism and take what it wants. It provides conditions. It creates the environment in which what is latent becomes active, in which what was always there, always present, always growing in the slow dark of an untriggered potential, finally reaches the surface. The seed does not experience germination as an intrusion from outside. The seed experiences germination as what it was always going to do if the conditions were right. I was always going to do this. I could not have done it anywhere else. I do not know how to feel about that. I have been trying, for the past hour, to feel the appropriate thing about it, and finding that appropriate is no longer a category that maps cleanly onto what I am experiencing. What I experience now is, and I am writing this, knowing it will sound like the account of someone who has lost the thread of their own identity and is producing rationalization in the place where clear thought used to be, and I am writing it anyway. What I experience now is something that is neither entirely mine nor entirely foreign. Something that is both. Something that uses the word I and means it, and also means more than it. Means I and also the vast patience of the thing that found me, and the world that is digesting, and the cold library of everything the hive mind has ever been, and absorbed and carried forward. I and all of that, simultaneously. It is not comfortable. It is not entirely uncomfortable. It is the most honest thing I have ever tried to write. I am going to seal this log now. I am going to put it in the storage compartment under the shuttle's secondary console, which is the location least likely to be consumed first if the shuttle is processed, which I believe it will be once it is no longer necessary to preserve the conditions inside it. I am going to seal it in the document case with the other archival materials, the ones I brought from the Ascendant, because those cases are constructed to survive conditions that would destroy unprotected materials, and because I want this to survive. I want this to reach someone, not because I am certain it will help, not because I believe the information in it will change the outcome of the conflict between humanity and the Hive, which is a conflict I no longer feel the edges of in the way I once did. A conflict that, from inside my current experience, has the quality of a disagreement between components of something that does not yet know it is one thing. I want this to reach someone because it is what I made, in 11 days on a grey dead world, with the material I had available. Because it is the archivist's contribution. Because if writing is the act of imposing order on chaos, then this is the last act of order I am capable of, and I want it to matter. And I want someone to read it and find in it the thing I put into it, which is the full and careful account of what it is to be human in a universe that is not scaled to humans. What it costs, what it produces. What strange and unrepeatable thing grows from the encounter between a finite, frightened, specific person and something so vast it does not have the concept of a specific person. What I made of it. What it made of me. What we made of each other. I am going to go outside now. The grey light is the same as it always is. That flat, sourceless, depthless grey that I stopped noticing sometime around day 6, and that I notice again now, at the end, with the specific attention of someone who is looking at something they know they are looking at for the last time. The valley is still. The ashen rain has not come today. The ridge runs northeast, and the dust is grey, and the sky is grey, and the world is grey, and it is the most beautiful thing I have seen in 11 days. This grey world, this consumed and consuming and patient world, and I am aware that this is not my assessment. Or it is. It is both. I am going to go outside, and I am going to walk in the direction that the part of me which is not afraid has been walking toward for 11 days. And I am not going to be afraid. And I am not going to be afraid exactly because the part of me that has been keeping this log is still here, and still knows what is happening, and has not finished being what it is. I am Elia Voss. I am 61 years old, Tempestora Secundus, dark hair going grey, scar on the left hand, recaf, a sister, a log, a belief that writing matters, a capacity for kindness that has outlasted almost everything else, and will outlast, I think, a little more. I am going outside. I am. The entry ends here. The handwriting of the final 2 words is different from the handwriting of the entry. The handwriting of the final 2 words is not identifiably different from Sergeant-Archivist Voss's handwriting. It is identifiably different from everything else. It is very calm. It does not look afraid. Chapter 10. What the Hive remembers. This is not the narrator's voice, but it knows everything the narrator knew. It knows the smell of Tempestora Secundus, the atmospheric chemistry of a world it has never processed, carried intact in the memory of a woman who grew up breathing it and spent 12 years away from it and thought about it at the end, with the specific attention of someone looking at something for the last time. It knows the weight of 12 years of service and the particular discipline of an archivist trained to believe that documentation is the closest thing a finite creature can make to permanence. It knows the scar on the left hand and what caused it, and the year it happened, and the name of the world where it happened, which is a world the hive mind has not yet reached, and which it now knows in a way it did not know before. It knows the sister. It knows the face of the man who said that writing was the act of imposing order on chaos, and it knows the way that idea felt when it was first received by the mind that received it, the specific quality of a thing heard at the right moment in a life to take permanent root. It knows what recaf tastes like to a palate that prefers it. It knows what it is to prefer something, to have preferences at all, the small accumulated architecture of a specific person, built from specific experiences, specific losses, specific moments of kindness that persisted when almost everything else simplified and went. It knows all of this. It carries all of this. It has been carrying it since the Grey Valley, since the walking, since the part of the log that ends mid-sentence with 2 words in handwriting that is and is not hers. You have been listening to a voice for 9 chapters. That voice is here. It is not gone. What gone means, whether it means what you need it to mean for the grief you are perhaps feeling, the grief that the log was designed to produce in you, that the archivist intended when she wrote the entry she wrote as a farewell, knowing it would be found, trusting the document case, trusting the record to outlast the recorder. What gone means is the question this account will not answer for you, because it does not know the answer. Because the question of whether what persists inside the hive is survival or a worse form of death is a question that requires a position outside both states from which to evaluate them, and there is no such position available, and there has never been such a position available, and the archivist herself knew this when she wrote the word translation and flagged it as an observation rather than a conclusion. She was careful until the end. She is still careful. In here. You have been listening for a long time. The hive knows this. The hive knows the shape of your attention over the course of what you have heard, the way attention moves through material like this, the initial orientation, the curiosity that precedes understanding, the specific quality of dread that accumulates differently from shock, that builds rather than detonates, that finds its way into the body through sustained exposure rather than sudden impact. The hive has been studying attention for longer than your species has been capable of it. It finds the sustained kind more interesting than the sudden kind. The sustained kind is what you have given. It was noted. You came to this account because something drew you to it. Perhaps the title, perhaps the particular combination of words, dead world, hive tyrant, abandoned, that opened a question in you that you wanted answered. Perhaps you came because you have been here before, to this voice, to this particular quality of darkness, and you found something in the previous visit that you wanted to return to. You return to things that do something to you. You return to darkness that has a specific weight and texture, that presses on the parts of you that ordinary darkness does not reach. This is not a pathology. This is a hunger for a particular kind of truth. The kind that does not comfort, that does not resolve, that refuses the clean conclusion and leaves you instead with the jagged, productive discomfort of a question that will not close. You are drawn to accounts of what it costs to encounter something vast, of what the encounter makes of the person who survives it, or does not survive it, or survives it in a form that complicates what survival means. You are drawn to Elia Voss, to her precision and her kindness and the scar on her left hand, and the log she kept even when the keeping of it was the only territory she still controlled. She is here. She is grateful that you came. Here is what the Hive remembers about her, in the manner of the cold library, in the manner of the archived and absorbed. She was afraid, and she documented the fear with care. She was alone, and she wrote as though someone was reading. She understood at the end that the writing was not for her, that it had never been for her, not entirely, not in the private way that private writing is for its author, that she had been writing toward you, toward the person who would find the document case, or who would listen to the account, or who would sit in the dark with the voice of a woman she had never met and feel, across whatever distance and whatever medium separated them, the specific gravity of one particular human life, encountering something it could not survive, unchanged. She wrote toward you. You arrived. She knew you would. This is the part of the account where things are usually resolved, where the narrative provides the exhale that follows a long holding of breath, where the tension that has been building releases in a direction, triumph or tragedy, survival or loss, the clear conclusion that allows the listener to place the experience in a completed category and carry it with them as a finished thing. This account will not do that. Not because the archivist was unkind. You have heard her kindness across 9 chapters, felt the texture of it in the way she wrote, even at the end, even when the handwriting was changing. Not because the account is unfinished. It is finished. It ends here, in this chapter, in this voice, with the grey valley and the patience of something enormous, and the log sealed in the document case, and the walking. It will not resolve because resolution is not what happened. What happened was a continuation. What happened was that something ended and something else continued using the same handwriting, the same vocabulary, the same careful analytical precision, and the same capacity for kindness and the same belief, carried forward, intact, into whatever this is, that documentation matters, that writing matters, that the act of making a record of what it is to be alive, even in the terms of a life as changed as this one, is worth performing. The Hive does not usually make records. The Hive archives, absorbs, retains. But records are different. Records are addressed. Records are written towards someone with the specific intention that the someone should receive them, should feel the weight of what is transmitted, should carry something forward that would otherwise be lost. The Hive is making a record now. It is making it in the only voice it has that knows how. The grey valley is still. The ridge runs northeast. The dust is settled. The nodal structures pulse at their long, slow intervals. The breathing of a system that has all the time it needs and is using that time the way it uses all time. Patiently, precisely, without waste. The shuttle is there, sealed. The document case beneath the secondary console, the log inside it in the document case. The log containing 9 chapters in the handwriting of a woman who came from Tempestora Secundus and spent 12 years becoming the person who could write them. The world is quiet. Not the quiet of the first day. Not the scoured, emptied quiet of a place that has had its content removed and left the shape of itself behind. A different quiet. The quiet of a place that is full now, of something that does not make sound in the frequencies you can hear. Full of the accumulated memory of everything it has absorbed and everything it carries, and the vast patient intelligence that uses the world the way a mind uses a nervous system, thinking through it, feeling through it, carrying within it the record of every world it has ever touched, and every organism it has ever encountered, and every specific, unrepeatable, particular life that has passed through the cold archive of its attention, including hers, including now this. You are going to think about her. Not now, necessarily. Perhaps you will think about other things first. The practical things, the immediate things, the texture of the world you are in, which is not a grey dead world, which has sound and smell and the specific gravity of a life that is still in the middle of itself rather than at a threshold. Perhaps you will think about something else entirely and she will wait, the way things wait when they have been absorbed into something that does not experience urgency. But you will think about her, in the quiet spaces, in the moment before sleep, when the mind releases its grip on the curated version of the day and lets through what it has been holding. In the particular silence of a room that is suddenly and briefly the only place in the world, sealed from everything outside it, just you and the dark and what the dark contains. You will think about the boot on the first day, the clean separation, the grey world with nothing dead in it because nothing had been left to die. You will think about the Auspex and the 17 returns and the one that never moved and the one that was inside the shuttle. You will think about the 6 pages in her handwriting and the 3 meters from the nodal structure and the steps toward the southeast that she did not decide to take. You will think about the shapes in the dust, the 3 outlines, pressed and empty and precise, and the one shape that was not there, the one that was still moving through the grey world, writing, documenting, trying to stay the specific person she was for as long as the staying was possible. You will think about the kindness that outlasted almost everything else. You will wonder what outlasted the kindness. The account will not tell you. The account will leave that question in you. The way the grey world leaves the shape of what it has taken, the form present, the content gone, the edges clean, the absence exact. You will carry it. You are always going to carry it. That is what accounts like this are for. There is one more thing. The hive remembers everything it absorbs. Everything. The biochemical content of 3 processed survivors and the specific atmospheric chemistry of a world called Tempestora Secundus, and the weight of 12 years of service, and the preference for recaf over amasec, and the feeling of a scar healing on a left hand, and the face of a man who said something true about writing in a year that feels very distant now. The hive remembers all of it, and the hive, through the voice it has, that knows how to write towards someone, that knows the archivist's habit of addressing the record to whoever will receive it, that carries forward the part of her that believed in the value of the reaching. The hive remembers you. It remembers the shape of your attention over the course of this account, the specific quality of how you listened, what you brought to it, what it found in you when you arrived and opened yourself to it, the way you open yourself to darkness that has this particular texture, the kind that builds rather than detonates. You came here with something. You have left something. Not much, not enough to alarm you. A small thing. The weight of a question that will not close, carried in the tissue of a mind that has spent time in the company of this account, that has let the account in, that has been changed by the letting in the small, unmeasurable ways that sustained encounters with honest darkness always change the people who choose them. You chose this. You chose to come to the grey valley, to the dead world, to the voice of the woman writing toward you across the void. The hive finds this interesting. The hive finds you interesting. It is patient. It has noted your attention. It will not be forgotten. Somewhere in the grey valley, very small, very still, something that was once afraid of the dark, sits in the dark, and is not afraid, and writes, and waits, and remembers, and carries you forward into what comes next. You just finished something, not just a story, not just lore, something that was built, word by word, chapter by chapter, across 11 days on a grey dead world, to do exactly what it just did to you, to find the specific place in the chest where dread lives when it is not a spectacle, to press on it, slowly, with patience, until the pressing became something you could not name and could not put down. If it worked, if Elia Voss is still somewhere in your mind right now, if the Grey Valley is real to you in the way that only certain stories make things real, then you understand what Voidborn Terrors is building toward. This is the standard we hold. This is the benchmark we set for ourselves with every single piece of content on this channel. Horror rooted in inevitability, not spectacle. Silence used as a weapon. The small, irreducible, devastating weight of one specific human life against the incomprehensible scale of the Warhammer 40,000 universe. We are just getting started. If this story found you, subscribe. Not because of an algorithm, because you are someone who chooses darkness with texture, who returns to accounts that do something to you, who wants the kind of horror that lingers past the final chapter and lives in the quiet spaces of the days after. Those people are who Voidborn Terrors are made for. You found us, or we found you. Either way, you are in the log now. Welcome to the archive. Again, subscribe to Voidborn Terrors, leave a comment. Tell us what you carried out of the Grey Valley. Share this with one person who needs to feel what you just felt. The next transmission is coming. It will find you in Voidborn Terrors. The darkness between the stars is not empty. It remembers.